to just go ahead and dive in and start explaining that concept, Jonathan?
That's a big part of how Wall Street's been running us into a ditch for the last 30 years.
The debt ceiling is not some sort of macroeconomic concept.
The U.S. isn't really a great place, and it's not really the land of the free.
Get 1,000 people together and let's go lay siege to City Hall.
Hello to all of the real progressives out there. Thank you so much for tuning in today. We have a fantastic show for you all as usual. As you can see, I have my yellow vest on, which means we are about to shortly to talk to Eric Kessner here shortly, who's in DC. We're going to get an update from him on what he's been up to. I do want to quickly do, as usual, the RP plugs. You guys, please go to realprogressives.org to learn more about us or find all of our fantastic content, all sorts of great articles, educational and media podcasts. Don't miss our founder and CEO, Steve Grumbine's podcast, Macro and Cheese. He's also now doing a show during the week called The Rogue Scholar, which you can find on the Real Progress in Action YouTube channel. Don't miss Jody Newell's The Up and Up, where Jody talks to activists and people on the ground and how we can engage in direct action and organizing. And don't forget, if you can, please do go to realprogressives.org/donate. We are a 501c3 and 501c4, and every little bit does help us engage in activism and media spaces and education and policy and all these kinds of things, right? So realprogressives.org. Make sure you're not missing any of our fantastic content. I do want to just up front, you guys, I want to apologize. I have not slept a whole lot lately, and I am not feeling like myself today. So please bear with me if I stumble through a few things or lose my train of thought. We're obviously going to talk about Ukraine today. We're going to talk about the media's pretty overt racism in terms of how they decide to cover conflicts in different parts of the world. Sabrina Salvati, better known as Sabby Sabs, joined me to discuss the State of the Union address that Biden gave last week. And we have a few other stories that are very worthy of coverage to dive into as well. As I said, I do want to start with Eric Kessner here. Eric's been kind enough to join the show again. Eric, thank you for being here. It's great to see you as always.
Thanks for having me, Luke. Can you hear me all right?
I can hear you good. Yep. Can you maybe just start by giving a little update to the audience about what you've been. Oh, actually, I'm sorry. I wanted to start. Make sure to make a point. What is your Patreon, Eric? How can people help you out?
Oh, great. Thank you for mentioning that. The Patreon is patreon.com/Yellow Vest Action.
Yellow Vest Action or Actions?
Singular, Action.
Singular.
Yellow
Okay.
Vest Action. Yep.
So that's up on the screen there. Please do help Eric out if you can. For those who don't know, Eric is in DC engaging in demonstrations and trying to talk with lawmakers and networking with other organizers. And he's up to all sorts of really fantastic stuff. So now that we've got the Patreon out of the way there, can you update the audience on what you've been up to?
Well, today we were out following the convoy, the People's Convoy, about a couple hundred trucks coming into DC. We set ourselves up on an overpass and we got our signs out, the ones that said Unite the Working Class and Medicare for All Now. And we wanted to kind of test the waters on what the crossover might be, because that's a really deeply conservative area. And if I'm not mistaken, that People's Convoy is a conservative movement. But I think that it's important because in order to have any kind of revolution or truth revolution, not a bloody fighting revolution, but like I said, a truth revolution, we're going to need to unite the right and the left on at least one very important issue, and I think healthcare is that issue. Everybody needs healthcare. Everybody has family that are hurting because of our healthcare system, or have friends that are in crisis because of our healthcare system, are going broke because of our healthcare system. So I think it's important that we at least try to unite the right and the left on this one ip, because I think that's what it's going to take to bring it home. But so anyway, we got our signs out there on the overpass. Great location. We're editing the videos now, and we just got a dynamite response from all the truckers, just honking their asses off. They want healthcare too. We are not in a bubble in any kind of way as progressives, and we're not in a bubble any kind of way as Americans. This is something that's important to everybody, I think. And I talked to a number of people today. One gentleman who saw our signs as we were kind of shutting things down today, he says to me, yeah, unite the working class. I had them stacked on top of each other. He wasn't able to see the Medicare for All sign. And I said, yeah, right on, man. And we need some health care, don't we? He's like, oh, man, I could retire if I could get health care. You know, there's people out there that can't retire. He was of retirement age. And there's people out there that can't retire because they can't, because they don't have any health care. And we need to decouple healthcare from employment. It's just absurd. So anyway, we got a lot of positive reinforcement on what we're doing out here. And like you said, we're making connections in the lefty crowd. So I'm excited, and I'd really also like to beg of your audience that we need help out here. We need organizing help. If you live on the East Coast, if you're within reach of DC and you want to help organize, definitely get a hold of me. We need to talk because the time is now. We're approaching a point where something must be done. We're the last modern industrialized country on Earth to not have socialized medicine, and boy, does it show. So many people are hurting. The time is really now. While we're in the midst of this pandemic still, I'm really sticking by my theory that if we can't get healthcare during a pandemic, they're never going to give it to us. So it's going to be up to us to organize in the streets to make it happen. Just like any other successful movement, civil rights, women's rights, gay rights, it all happened. It was all catalyzed in the streets. That's the reason that those movements got the traction they did, is because people came together in the streets and fought, and sometimes went to jail and sometimes died to say that, in America, things need to be fair. So the time's now.
Yeah, and just for the audience there, I put Eric's Twitter handle up on the screen @VestActions. Please do reach out to him if you're in the DC area, or if you're on the East Coast, if you're willing to travel to help out. I also encourage my audience, if you know people in the DC area that are interested in activism and organizing, want healthcare, please reach out. You guys spread the news. We want to help Eric out as much as we possibly can. I wanted to emphasize the point you made about how healthcare is something that can unite people across political lines. Can you share with the audience? I know we talked about this last time you were on, but you stopped in some conservative cities. I mean, Salt Lake City and St. Louis, and you stopped in some conservative places, Idaho, and you got a pretty strong response, if I'm not mistaken. Can you talk about how conservative areas responded to your plea for Medicare for All?
Yeah, absolutely. Boise, Idaho, Salt Lake City, Kansas City, other places that we got a really, really strong response, just as strong as in mainly progressive areas, like Seattle. So everybody's for this. We have America behind us on this issue. We just need to get everybody all together at once, at the same time, on the same day, or same week, or same month, or however long it takes, so we can overcome this. I think we can do it. I really do.
And I was hoping you could also speak to what we often work on at Real Progressives, or often sort of highlight and emphasize at Real Progressives, which is the MMT stuff, Macroeconomic Understanding. Can you talk about why it's so important for us to educate people on that issue as it pertains to healthcare, to sort of push back against the how you're going to pay for it, my taxes are going to go up content?
Absolutely. They have us so propagandized that they have us asking the wrong questions. They have us, every time good legislation is run up the ladder, that's the bulwark that it runs into, is how you're going to pay for it. So we have to be able to answer that question perfectly and succinctly, so it makes sense. Because at this point, people are just like, well, yeah, I guess the government's constrained, and where are we going to find the money? Yeah, so I guess we can't do that now, and sure is expensive, because we think of things as if they're on a household budget, like we're on a household budget. Cities, municipalities, states, people, we're all on a household style budget. That's not the position the federal government's in. They are not constrained. And what we call the national debt is really just the national tally. It's not a debt. you shouldn't call it a debt, even though they do, because no one ever has to pay it back, right? So if no one ever has to pay it back, how is that a debt? We need people to understand that the government, when it spends, that's their red ink, but that's not our red ink, that's their red ink. What it is for us is our black ink. They're spending on us, hopefully. I mean, that's the only way money makes it into the economy is new spending. And so that's all 100% new money. And it's not recycled, it's not reused, it's not my hard-earned tax dollars, like I used to say. I mean, no shade on anybody that still says that, because just a few years ago, that was like my credo. I don't want my tax dollars to pay for that, blah, 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 and I was economically illiterate, and that's okay, because we've been propagandized from birth to death, and we've been listening to the left politicians and the right politicians saying, how are you going to pay for it, and we're going to have to borrow money from China, and we're going to burden our grandchildren because we're running up the debt so high. Well, that doesn't get paid back. The national debt is simply every dollar that's ever been spent into the economy since America began, less tax dollars. Okay, it's a tally. It's not a debt, and we gotta stop worrying about it.
I like to call it the money supply. It's the money supply. And that's the best way to put it. You and I would not have any money in our wallet or our bank account if it weren't for the national debt. So
public money. It's public money.
That clock counter thing that they have in New York, that should say, money supply tally instead. To drive home your point about debt, I'm sure a number of the audience members have seen that the meme that goes around that says the world is X trillions in debt, and then the question is, to who? Who do we owe the Martians this debt? Like who? It's not the right language to use when discussing federal finance.
Luckily, we do have one person in Congress that has come forward publicly. The chairman, the House Chairman, John Yarmuth. I even have thank you signs here up on my ceiling here that we break out. And how often does a politician do anything right? It's so rare, but when they do something right, I think we got to be there to acknowledge that and to give them the kudos to encourage good behavior, right? And he came out on C-SPAN in an interview and explained, he said the words modern monetary theory. He held up Stephanie Kelton's book and he said, America really needs to get educated on economics here. And he laid it all out for us. He knows, and I think a lot of other people know in Congress too, but they're just afraid to talk about it, maybe because they don't know enough to feel comfortable, or maybe because there's pressures that we don't know about that restrict them from doing so, from giving away company secrets. I'm afraid, John Yarmuth announced his retirement about two or 3 weeks, I think, after that interview on C-SPAN. And I just hope that they're not walking him out. But I could see how that could happen. I'm probably just imagining that, but it sure is concerning. And so my question now is, who in Congress, which Congressperson is going to take the baton? Who's going to speak the truth about MMT for all to hear, just like John Yarmuth did, and who's going to lead that initiative? So I'd really, really love to pick John Yarmuth's brain. His scheduler, I have been talking to her, and she said that she's going to try and get me a telephone interview with him to talk about this. I guess they're not doing in-person interviews at this point because of COVID and stuff, but yeah, it looks like she had contacted me after a long dry spell where I hadn't heard from her, and so it looks like we're going to be able to talk to him and pick his brain and find out, which Democrat is the closest to John on this issue. Is it Ro Khanna? Is it AOC? We've all heard the story about, and seen the pictures of AOC at the dinner table, and on one side is Stephanie Kelton, on the other side is Pavlina Cherneva. She's got to know, but she doesn't talk about it. Why? That's another part of my mission here in DC is to talk about it, is to get people to start talking about it, even if they're just saying, hey, look at that crazy guy out there, with the MMT signs. Yeah, what a fool. I don't care. as long as it's on their lips and they're moving their mouth about it. MMT. I mean, it's the truth, and why they don't want to come forward with it, it just baffles me. But anyway, that's what we need to do.
I like to think of it like the Gandhi quote is like a pipeline, right? First they ignore you, then they laugh at you, then they condemn you or criticize you or fight you, and then you won. So if you're the crazy guy out on the corner that's making them laugh at us instead of ignoring us, I am 100% on board. That is a progression down the pipeline, right? And just to comment quickly on AOC, I do know that she does understand this stuff. I know that because her initial economic team had MMT economists on it. So why she won't talk about it or name it, I think, is a serious question and something that we need to work on.
Yeah, and I believe that Savage Joy has also interviewed her about MMT. So, but still, she's not talking about it, and we need an advocate, or we need a representative. I mean, to start talking about this stuff. It's so important, and until we clear people's minds and clear the propaganda, unlearn what we thought we knew about much hard-earned tax dollars, then we can't make room for the knowledge that is MMT. I've explained MMT to my own 12-year-old before, and he's like, "Oh, okay, yeah, I get it. That makes perfect sense. No problem." Because he doesn't have any propaganda to clear, right? He doesn't listen to any people lying to him and absorb that, and so his mind is fresh, and he understands the principles that he understands the difference between a currency issuer and a currency user. He understands that there's only one currency issuer. If anyone tries to be a currency issuer, they're going to jail for counterfeiting, right? Yeah. So there's only one monopoly currency issuer, and that's the federal government, and everybody else is a currency user. We're all on a household budget. They're not. It's really simple for a young mind. It seems that the older we get, especially, I'm not a boomer. I'm a boomer. Missed being a boomer by about 1 year, so you could call me a boomer probably, and it'd be pretty accurate. But the older that we get, the more these lies are reinforced in our minds, and they're harder to shed because I got to admit, after about chapter 4 in Stephanie Kelton's book, I had to phone a friend. I was in trouble. I was like, help me with this. I don't, you know what I mean? It really challenged me. And young people don't have that problem so much.
No, those paradigms haven't been instilled in them yet. Like the false framework of tax to spend has not been instilled yet, right?
Yeah. And even young people have heard of the power of the purse, and it all makes a lot more sense to them than it does to us, even though we've all understand, Article 1, Section 8, power of the purse. It's just easier for them and so hard for some older folks like me. So
yeah, well, I really just want to drive home, Eric, what you're saying in the sense that I think we're not trying to shame anybody who doesn't understand this stuff. The narratives have been manufactured. This is very intentional that people do not understand.
Yeah.
So we're trying to educate, right?
Yeah. So we got to uncover all the company secrets, and so everybody's informed. And once they're informed about MMT, like you and I, when we learned about it, they'll be fucking outraged. I mean, we all knew that they're lying to us, but we didn't all know exactly how bad that they've been lying to us. And it's really bad. And when you come to understand that, when you have that paradigm shift in perspective, and you're looking through that MMT truth lens, and you can see how the system actually works, and that you can see that we've been asking the wrong set of questions. How are we going to pay for it? And we're left with that. And that's not the questions we should be asking. The questions we should be asking are, why do they seemingly want to kill us and starve us out? I mean, not by what they say, but how they vote. Judging by just looking at how they vote, it looks like they want to starve us out. I mean, I'm sorry, but that's just the plain and simple truth. Otherwise they'd be helping us, right? They have the power to help us right now. The money's right there, and they won't do it. So why won't they do it? Well, they need to keep that wealth gap nice and wide. They need to, rich people, they judge themselves by how much better they're doing than the next guy down, right?
And that's all. we need to be desperate enough for them to sort of exploit us, right? If we're not desperate enough to be exploited, their business model falls apart. And if I could just compound what you're saying with a couple of Stephanie Colton quotes, one of my very favorites is, she says, when the MMT coin drops, you realize the suffering is gratuitous. And the other thing she said is, she said that the money should be, I'm paraphrasing on this one, but something like the money should be the least interesting portion of the policy conversation. There's nothing really there to talk about. The policy is what needs to be talked about, right?
Yeah, it's never about the paper. It's about the real resources that it's going to require to get, whatever we want to get through. So yeah. I think once people realize this, they'll really be outraged. And once the collective is angry enough, because we're the richest country in the history of ever, and we can't even take care of our people. And I think once people realize this, they'll expect more. They'll know that we deserve it, but they'll start expecting it once they know that it's there. So I think that's the key, is getting everybody to the point where we insist. And we're just not going to take no for an answer, because now we know.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes. And once that outrage is there, people will stop taking no for an answer. So, Eric, can you update us a little bit on, you have met some awesome fucking people over there. You've been networking with some progressives that I'm sure a lot of the audiences will recognize. Can you talk a little bit about some of the opportunities you've had to meet some people that are allies there in DC?
Yeah, and honestly, it was the craziest thing that happened. We met a couple of old timers, people that live, in shelters locally here, that were longtime activists down in front of the White House, and we've gotten to talking, and we really, kind of connected. And one of these guys, he says, "Hey man, you should come to our meeting tonight, because it's at 6:30, and we get together and talk about politics, man, and you got to come." And they've been doing this for a long time, and they also told me that they've been protesting. They've been activists ever since Vietnam, and so and they've had this little hut in front of the White House, a little activist hut, since 1981.
Oh my God.
I mean, someone from their group has been in this little hut, manning it, since 1981, 24/7, 365. Just an incredible effort. It's called the Peace Vigil. But anyway, so they invited me to their little meeting, and I was like, yeah, that sounds cool. So me and Riley went. We weren't, I don't know what we were expecting, but we were driving over there. I wrote down the name of the place, and Riley, he says to me, "Hey man, this is a 5-star hotel that they're telling us to go to. Are you sure that this is the right place?" And I'm like, "Well, yeah, I wrote it on my hand right here." I mean, it's like, okay, well, because we weren't expecting that, because these guys, they live at the shelter, right? And we just thought it was just a few guys that get together to bitch about politics, which I thought that I'd fit in perfectly. So anyway, we get there, and sitting in front of me is Marianne Williamson. The entire Redacted Tonight cast is up there doing comedy one by one. There's live music. Katie Halpert is live streaming the thing. John Carrico, the whistleblower, I'm sure he's on Political Misfits now and does a fantastic job. He was there, and Riley kind of nudged me. We're sitting next to each other, side by side, sort of in the back of the room, and he kind of nudged me. He's like, "What the fuck is happening here?" we couldn't believe it. We couldn't believe it. It was such good luck. And so after everything was over, we shook a bunch of hands and met some folks, and just had, Riley was actually planning on heading back the following Tuesday, but he's like, no, I'm going to stay now. There's something here for us. I mean, that was just too freaky coincidental to be not meant to be. I mean, that was a serious meant to be moment. And so we're gonna ride that wave. We're kind of in the network now with some of the cool kids. But that we need as many people as possible. We don't just need cool kids. We need as many organizers as possible. We got to connect a lot of dots. We need the action to happen right here in DC. So if you're in the DC area, any of your viewers, and you want to get together and help organize, we need a march for Medicare for all. The group March for Medicare for All is planning a march, but it's going to be in Missouri, and that's not until July. I'd love to get something a lot sooner going. I'd like to get something done a lot sooner. So anybody that's watching and wants to help out, we need to do this right now while we're still under pandemic conditions. Because again, if we can't get Medicare for all during a fucking pandemic, they're never going to give it to us. So we have to fight now. So anybody that wants to help, definitely get a hold of me on my Twitter at Yellow Vest Actions, and we'll talk and we'll get some shit done.
Yeah, and a quick shout out there to Double K for the super chat. Really appreciate it. Want to remind everybody that realprogressives.org/donate to help us out. And I've had Eric's Patreon up on the screen there. If you want to help Eric out, we really appreciate any and all donations. Eric, can you just tell people what kind of things you have planned for your stay there, and what they would be contributing to by helping you out?
Well, like I said, we need to organize marches, and it's not going to be just one. Obviously, we're not going to get it on our first try. It's got to be a consistent effort. So I'm going to be here for 4 or 5 months. And the other thing we're trying to do is we're trying to get sit-down interviews with politicians, or telephone interviews, if that's what we have to settle for, with politicians, to get them to come forward and talk about MMT, at least state their position, whether it's good, bad, or indifferent. We need to know how they feel about it, and in order to start those vital conversations. So that is a goal. We want to put together care packages for our representatives, anybody that'll see us, anybody that can hand a care package to, that's got, a copy of the deficit myth, and a blurb on Stephanie Kelton, and then a professional looking, official looking blurb on John Yarmuth and his position on MMT. And then once we get their position publicly, that's the goal. Follow up, have a very well known news person, like yourself, follow up with those folks and tell them that we're going to follow up with them on this, and just really try to pin them down and get these conversations started. So that's pretty big on our agenda as well. Other than that, there's a lot of protesting going on down here. This is really the place to be. In front of the White House, Medea Benjamin is down there with her group today. I'm sorry I couldn't get down there. We were following the truckers. We would have gotten back sooner if I'd have known, but she's got her group down there. They're protesting an anti-war message, which is fabulous. Everybody else is, not everybody else, but there's a lot of people that are warmongering right now because of this Ukraine thing. And they're down there doing the right thing. It's so awesome with Code Pink and Medea Benjamin, and they are bringing it with the anti-war message, and so thoughtful and helpful to do that at this point. And there's a different protest going on every day. So if you're an activist, DC is the place to be. The ears that matter are here, not in states. Okay, our states are broke. Okay, you can look at the CAFR report and you can see exactly which states can't even fund their own pensions, right? And so and that's the majority, right? There might be 4 or 5 states that might be able to squeeze a state-by-state healthcare initiative out, but just barely at that, maybe. And it just failed in California. And these state-by-state initiatives are calling themselves universal healthcare, and they're calling themselves single payer, and they're calling themselves Medicare for all, and it's bullshit. Okay, states are broke; they don't have the money. Why are you, even bothering? Go to where the money is. It's kind of like, I have this analogy, Luke. Let's say you're a 16 or 17-year-old teenager, right? And you need college, and you know it, and your teeth are rotting out of your mouth, and you know it, and you need the money to do these things. And let's say your parents are just kind of like me, living paycheck to paycheck, just on budget, if that, barely on budget, barely making it. And are you going to go to your parents, week after week, month after month, year after year, saying, "Hey, I'm I want you guys to pay for my health care and my college. You know, when you've got a grandma that's got more money than God in Washington, D.C., right? What are you going to ask? Are you going to ask your broke parents week after week like an idiot? Or are you going to go to where the money is, your richer than God grandma, and ask for those and ask for that?
Yeah.
You're going to go to the place where the money is, right? And it ain't anywhere else besides right here. This is where this is where the power is. This is where, the people that can make these decisions are. And so we need to be here where they can hear us, outside of their offices, outside of where they work, on the streets, circling these buildings, and demanding of our Congress, of our 535 lawmakers. We need to be making the demands of them, not broke ass states, which is like 40 of the 50 states are just fucking on their face.
It's not more. It's not more. I mean, and I love that analogy, Eric. And the other thing about this, for those that don't realize, and Warren Mosler and others have done fantastic work on this if you're interested in diving into the weeds, but Medicare for All would be deflationary, which means you want to increase deficit spending as you implement a deflationary policy. To use your analogy, the barely skating by parents cannot afford to increase their deficits, right? So that you go to the currency issuer for this for a myriad of reasons. And I really appreciate you highlighting that, because, look at how state programs are going right now. Is your state's education program thriving? I mean, come on. When you go to local places that are budgetarily constrained as the financial source for programs, you get horrible results. The federal government has the power of the purse, and we should utilize that to the fullest degree. I really, really appreciate you highlighting that, Eric. So one other thing I wanted to ask about, you mentioned Redacted tonight. Lee Camp has basically been wiped off of all platforms, and Lee does really fantastic work. So it's nonsense. It's absolutely, egregious. I'm hoping you can explain to the audience what's happened there.
It's exasperating. I mean, the Redacted Tonight crew is RT. It's over 100 people, I believe, and now they're not only out of work and out of a platform, but we have less truth to watch now, and I'm really I know that Lee has started a Patreon account, which is good, but I'm really hoping that we can that we can come together. And I mean, he's such a dynamite guy, and he's got such a good show. He's had that show for 8 years, and it's just a heartbreaker to see that, because of these sanctions, that to see that show go away. I mean, I love that show. It makes me want to fucking cry. So I'm just really mad about it, and I know a lot of other people are just pissed off about this too. And there's something that we can do about that also. I mean, there's got to be some sort of mutual aid, something that we can, where he can, some sort of platform that would work just as well, if not better. I'm a firm believer when one door closes, that a better door opens. I really believe that, and I think that if the left gets together, we can fix this. We can't do anything by ourselves. We have to have each other. That's where our power lies, is in each other. There's no such thing as bootstraps. There's no such thing as find your inner strength and go do it, buddy. We are only strong as a collective. So that's why I need folks down here. We've got a lot of messages, and there's a lot of outrage, and this is where it happens. And it's got to be about collective solutions, not libertarian hooray for me and to hell with the other guy attitude.
Hyper individualism. I'm sure a lot of people do recognize this, but you mentioned the bootstraps analogy. That was originally a joke, because you cannot pull yourself up by your bootstraps. I mean, imagine you're laying on the ground. How are you going to use your bootstraps to pull yourself? It was originally a mocking of the libertarian mindset, and yet somehow it has now turned into this. Oh, pull yourself up by your boots.
Well, it's got to be up to us in the streets, Luke, because it just, that's the way it is. I mean, Obama himself said, "You got to make me do it." He basically, I'm not sure what speech it was, but I remember very clearly. He said, "You have to make me do it." right?
Yeah.
Which speaks right to what I was saying earlier about movements getting catalyzed in the streets. We can't rely on electoral politics anymore. Anybody that's relying on electoral politics to solve the problems that we have, I mean, that would just be an incremental solutions at best. Even if we did have success with that, that's just not going to work anymore. We have no, it's not. We have to hit the streets, and we have to find a way to do that. And we need to ask those that can help us and support us to come forward and do so. And that's the only way it's going to get fixed. Bernie's been preaching that bottom-up approach since I've been paying attention in 2015. And he's like, that's the only way things happen is when, I mean, word for word, when millions of people come together, stand up to say enough is enough. He didn't mean online. He meant together in person on the streets. Politicians don't give a fuck about pressure online. You know, they don't care about that. You know, that doesn't pressure them. You know, we're going to push Biden left online. That doesn't work. You know, it's got to be.
For a decade, how's that gone? You know,
that's right. That's right. This is where you push Biden left in DC. Okay. When you know, the other day, I got a lot of satisfaction. I saw his motorcade leaving the White House, and I wish I had a shit ton of people with me. And I made a TikTok about it, and we videoed it. But I saw his motorcade leaving the White House to drop him off at, you know, to lie to us about, you know, the State of the Union address, and which he mentioned. He mentioned the national debt like 6 times during that presentation. You know.
And the deficit and and
the gratuitous Medicare for all, you know. But I got out there with my signs and I stepped out on the street as all of the black SUVs went rushing by with the 20 motorcycles on each end. And I hope he saw me. He might not have seen me, but I tell you what, if I had a big group of people with me, they would have fucking seen me for sure. And we could have even, you know, possibly gotten in the way. Right? They closed the street down, but we were already parked on the street. It's right next to the White House. If we're prepared for something like that, we can apply that kind of pressure in person. That's what it's going to take. You can fuck around all day online and think you're pressuring Joe Biden, but it ain't working, and he don't give a fuck. Okay, they don't care about us.
Yeah,
they just flat out
don't. That's you know an apt point to close on here. I want to really encourage.
Let me make one more point, Luke, and that is that voting and electoral politics. Voting is where our responsibility begins. Okay, it's not where it ends. You know, we're not one and done with voting. Hey, I voted. I did my part. No, you didn't. No, you didn't. You did you know. That's just where your responsibility starts. You know, we need to fill the streets. We can get anything we want. We can get everything we want if we realize our power, our collective power together, locking elbows and showing them that we're fucking here and we're not going away until we get what we want. And we will get what we want, but we have to do that.
Yeah. 100% agree, Eric. You are a fucking inspiration. I am so happy to be able to bring your journey here and your protests and things to the audience. And I just want to once again reiterate, you guys, Eric's Patreon there is at the bottom of the page. Perhaps even more importantly, if you know anybody in DC that is interested in getting involved with Eric, please reach out to him on Twitter at @VestActions. And join him in his yellow vest protest there. We really could use as many bodies as possible, and if you're able to contribute to Eric, please do so. We're going to try to bring you guys an update here every week on what Eric's been up to and try to support, gain some momentum and things like that in DC. Eric, thank you again for taking the time. We really appreciate it.
And one more thing, Luke, I really don't want to mention my Patreon without mentioning Real Progressives Patreon. Real Progressives has been behind me 100%. The most amazing group of brothers and sisters I could ever ask for. Okay. Yeah. So it's patreon.com/Real Progressives. That's an important place to go also. Okay. Thanks for having me on, buddy. Love you.
Yeah, you too, man. And hey, realprogressives.org is also a great place for educational content for those who are interested in learning more about the MMT stuff that we were diving into earlier. Really appreciate that plug, Eric. We'll be in touch soon here.
All right, man. Well, I appreciate you. Thank you.
No problem. Happy to. And I'm going to leave the segment here with a clip that Eric put out when he started his trip, just kind of describing what he is getting up to there in DC. This is Eric's clip starting off his journey from Seattle.
Hey everyone, my name is Eric Kessner. Please follow my journey cross country. We're going to be driving from Seattle to Washington, D.C., and we have to jumpstart this movement into reality. And I think that we can do it. I think this is fixable, but it is going to take all of us that care to move the movement into the streets.
And the last thing, I would be remiss if I did not mention, I'm going to be helping host a series of panels next weekend on Medicare for All with the group that originally organized those Medicare for All marches last summer and that Eric referenced earlier. That is, we'll announce platforms and things like that and where you can get involved, but I encourage everybody to join for that summit. We're going to have a number of panels approaching healthcare from a number of different areas. One of them will be an MMT panel describing how it can be paid for. Another one's going to go over the basic history of healthcare in this country and Medicare and the privatization efforts. We're going to talk about racism in healthcare. We're going to talk about how the disabled community is harmed by our healthcare system and all sorts of great stuff. So I want to encourage everybody, if you're interested in learning more, to tune in next weekend for those summits. And huge thanks again to Eric. You guys please support if you can. So we're going to start today with Ukraine, you guys. And I'm sure most of you have been keeping up on kind of the general happenings and details. So what I'm going to try to focus on today is how the media has covered it, and compare that to how they've covered other instances. And I really want to be clear, you guys, this is not meant as whataboutism. This is not meant as a justification for Putin or Russia. What this is meant as is some context that I think is sorely lacking in most of the press. So I'm going to start here by showing you guys a thread that Alan McLeod put together, where journalists essentially admit that they are covering Ukraine with more emphasis and urgency because they're racist. And he has a number of examples here. Really encourage you all to follow at Alan R. McLeod on Twitter. He's consistently pointing these kinds of issues out. Thread, the most racist Ukraine coverage on TV news. The BBC, quote, "It's very emotional for me because I see European people with blue eyes and blonde hair being killed." Ukraine's deputy chief prosecutor, David Sakvarelidze, apologies for butchering that. You guys can see, I mean, that's just how overt can you possibly be in your racism? That is insane. And I also want to note, you guys, these people aren't even just saying this privately. They think it's okay. They think this is acceptable enough that they can just go spout it on TV publicly. That it just goes to show how comfortable they feel in their racism. In addition to the nauseating nature of it to start with. Number two, CBS News, quote, "This isn't Iraq or Afghanistan. This is a relatively civilized, relatively European city." That's from CBS foreign correspondent Charlie D'Agata. Again, open, overt racism. Open, overt racism. Number three is Al Jazeera, quote, "What's compelling is looking at them, the way they are dressed. These are prosperous, middle-class people. There are not obviously refugees trying to get away from the Middle East or North Africa. They look like any European family that you'd live next door to." Once again, you guys, I mean, what do I even add to that? That's just explicit fucking racism. And that they're comfortable just spewing this on TV shows you what kind of environment the media is in, what kind of sort of tone is considered normal and acceptable in the media. Number 4, BMS TV in France. Quote, we are in the 21st century, we are in a European city, and we have cruise missiles fire, and a cruise missile fire as though we were in Iraq or Afghanistan. Can you imagine? So notice, you guys, I want to take a moment on this one. Notice the fucking framing. It's totally acceptable and normal for violence to happen in the Middle East to this asshole. He just, the presumption is that violence will be inflicted upon Middle Eastern civilians. But the outrage is when that violence trickles out of the Middle East. Again, just open, explicit racism. And it informs us as to why the media has been so nonstop covering Ukraine when they completely neglect to cover Yemen or Somalia or Sudan or Ethiopia or Iraq or Afghanistan or Pakistan or Libya or Palestine, where we're supporting an ethnic cleansing campaign, right? Because those places are where violence is expected. That's normal and okay, according to this fucking pathetic excuse for a human being. Carrying on here, the Daily Telegraph. This time war is wrong because the people look like us and have Instagram and Netflix accounts. It's not in a poor remote country anymore. That's Daniel Hannan. Once again, scum of the earth, overt racism. Just typing that out and spewing it to the public, thinking that that's completely normal and acceptable. It goes to show you what these people's conversations are behind closed doors. If they'll say that in a newspaper, if they'll say this shit live on TV, can you even imagine what they're saying privately or what they really believe? Can you even imagine? Number 6, ITV in the UK, quote, the unthinkable has happened. This is not a developing third world nation. This is Europe. So she at least knew to use the new age dog whistle, which is developing or developed, but it's no less racist. It's no less an admission of caring more about people who are white than you care about people in the Middle East. BMS TV again, this is France. Quote, it's an important question. We're not talking here about Syrians fleeing. We're talking about Europeans. I mean, how is there not a follow-up to that, you guys? What exactly do you mean? What exactly is the difference to you? How is there not a fucking follow-up to that? What distinction are you making? Why is it okay that this violence happens in Syria? Again, just absolute scum of the earth. And these are the people that we prop up to give us our news. These are the people whose opinions are supposed to fucking matter. I don't even know how to contain myself right now. It's unbelievable. Number 8, if you speak French, sample from the racism buffet on offer. For anyone who does happen to speak French, I do not. Go give that a look on Alan's thread. There's another Spanish one here. And this is translated to English, quote, these aren't like the other children that we've become accustomed to see suffer on TV. These children are blonde with blue eyes, so this is very important. Okay, there's an open admission, an overt, admission that kids with blonde hair and blue eyes matter more. This, by the way, often from the same crowd that likes to say all lives matter. You're telling on yourself. You're fucking telling on yourself. Again, pathetic excuse for a human being. Number 10, star UK media personality Matthew Wright on ITV's flagship show This Morning. Quote, the US has used a thermobaric bomb before in Afghanistan, but the idea of it being used in Europe is stomach churning. But it's not stomach churning for that to be used against Afghan civilians. That's acceptable. By the way, right now, you guys, 23 million Afghans are facing food insecurity and potential famine because the United States has seized their reserves. Do you see wall-to-wall coverage about that? Do you see wall-to-wall coverage about the starving Afghans? Do you see wall-to-wall coverage about the millions in Yemen that are being they're being having a genocide inflicted upon them by the Saudi Arabian government and the UAE with the assistance of the United States and many of our NATO allies? Do you see wall-to-wall coverage about that, you guys? Any wall-to-wall coverage about the fact that we were bombing Somalia as Putin invaded Ukraine? No? None. Of course not. Carrying on, 11, this one's the New York Times. On U.S. veterans going to Ukraine, it not so subtly suggests that Middle Easterners love dictatorships. quote, after years of serving in smoldering operations trying to spread democracy in places that only had a tepid interest in it. Cite that, New York Times. Where did anyone in the Middle East suggest they only had a tepid interest in democracy? Okay, you can oppose like right-wing theocratic jihadist groups without taking their views and projecting them across an entire region. Notice the framing on that. That's the New York Times, the supposed gold standard in fucking journalism. You guys, I worked myself up on this one. Great work from Alan McLeod. Again, I want to encourage everybody to follow him at Alan R. McLeod on Twitter, bringing this stuff to light. This is why the coverage has been so much more urgent, with so much more emphasis on Ukraine than any of the other, violent actions that have been taken, often by the United States and our allies around the planet. And just to really drive that point home, you guys, and show you kind of how distinct this the difference in coverage is. This is also by Alan McLeod in Mint Press News. It's different. They're white. Media ignore conflicts around the world to focus on Ukraine. A Mint Press News analysis found that in a single week, Fox News, the New York Times, the Washington Post, CNN, and MSNBC ran almost 1,300 separate stories on the Ukraine invasion, 2 stories on the Syria attack, 1 on Somalia, and none at all on the Saudi-led war on Yemen. 1,300 stories on the Ukraine, you guys. 1,300, and we get 3 combined. 3 combined on Syria, Somalia, and Yemen. And again, there's a bit of a visual here. I'm going to skip over the text just to show you guys this. Look at this chart. Look at this chart. Blue is Fox News, red is the New York Times, green is the Washington Post, orange is CNN, and yellow is MSNBC. Do you see any coverage on Yemen, Somalia, or Syria there? No. But look at the number of articles that have been written on Ukraine. Okay, again, you guys, I do want to give the caveat. This is not meant to be whataboutism. This is not meant to justify anything on behalf of Putin or Russia. It's to point out to you, like, how the press manufactures consent for certain things and not others, how the press dictates what you at home care about and what you think matters, based upon what's called propaganda by omission. So they leave out Yemen, the Middle East, Africa. They leave that out and focus in exclusively on Ukraine, and so that they can start the story at Putin's a bad guy. They also conveniently, as I covered last week, they leave out a lot of the context pertaining specifically to Ukraine. They leave out that we engaged in a coup in 2014, that the CIA helped engage in a coup, right-wing coup, that was obvious and blatant aggression. They leave out the fact that we've been arming neo-Nazis. Again, blatant aggression. They leave out the fact that NATO for the last 20 plus years has expanded east towards Russia in an obvious move of aggression. And I actually meant to queue up a Noam Chomsky clip here from a handful of years ago, where he was saying, the quote he gave was, "It wouldn't matter who the Russian leader is. That's going to be perceived as aggression. Doesn't matter who's in charge. It's not about Putin. When you keep expanding NATO, which was specifically designed, specifically implemented, formed, whatever, to oppose the Soviet Union, and then you keep expanding that group closer and closer to Russia's borders, how are they supposed to take it, you guys? How are they supposed to take it?" And again, same caveat I gave last week. I'm not suggesting that any one individual thing here might have been the linchpin that caused Putin to invade. I'm not suggesting that if we didn't do any one particular thing that he wouldn't have. I'm just providing the full context, because if you actually want to understand history or understand a world event, you have to take that context into consideration. And the media steadfastly refuses to provide it for you, as you guys saw there with that chart, just as one example. I also wanted to bring you guys there's been a lot of talk about a no-fly zone. I gave my opinions on sanctions last week, and largely my opinion is the same on that. Just to briefly kind of reiterate, guys, sanctions are aggression. Okay, they used to be called blockades. Sanctions are a form of an act of war. Okay, and the sanctions that we are currently inflicting upon countries like Cuba and Iran are barbaric and have been internationally condemned, because they hit civilians in such horrible ways and cause human suffering. So the sanctions discussion, what's so bothersome to me about the sanctions discussion is that there's this, in the United States, it's framed as though there's only two options, a hot war or sanctions. There's no, acceptance of any other argument. Like, hey, maybe the first thing you do, you guys, if you're digging a fucking hole, the first thing you got to do is stop digging, right? If you want to fill that hole back in, you got to stop digging. So when the United States continues our aggression towards Russia, we're just digging the hole even further. If we inflict sanctions on Russia, we're digging the hole even further. The first thing you have to do if you want to calm this thing down is stop escalating yourself. Okay? And the other point I want to make, to somebody like Vladimir Putin, who pretty clearly is like a narcissistic, demigod type person who, right? To someone with that psychology, how do you think those sanctions are going to be received? Do you think Putin will look at the sanctions and go, oh, well, now I'll back off. Now that they've gotten more aggressive, now I'll back off. You're insane if you think that. You're off your fucking rocker if you think that. He'll take it as aggression and he'll respond accordingly. So the sanctions discussion to me is missing a whole lot of context in terms of how it would affect Russian civilians, how it would affect resources and international markets, and how ineffective I think it is likely to be, how I think it will escalate more than anything else. If you'd like to calm tensions, you guys, again, the first thing you do is you stop escalating yourself. If you want to fill the hole in, you stop fucking digging first. The United States is still digging. Okay, so there's this tendency to focus in and start the story at Putin invaded, now what do we do? No, you got to go back and see the full context to understand what it is that you should do, okay? Anyway, to get back to the no-fly zone, which there has been a lot of discussion about in the Ukraine, I have a piece here in Jacobin that I want to show you guys. This is by Ben Burgess. A no-fly zone in Ukraine would start World War III. It's the worst idea possible. A growing chorus of voices is calling for Joe Biden to establish a no-fly zone, an action that would risk the future of human civilization. I'm not much of an REM fan, but I've had It's the End of the World as We Know It, and I Feel Fine stuck in my head for days. A disturbing number of high-profile voices have been calling for President Joe Biden to establish a no-fly zone in Ukraine. To his credit, he steadfastly refused to do so, but these forces are only going to get louder as the Russian invasion drags on. My boiling hot take is that, and hear me out on this, starting World War III would be a bad thing. Biden's State of the Union was interrupted by chants of USA. A member of the U.S. House of Representatives has proposed deporting all Russian students from the United States. A prominent United States senator has publicly urged the assassination of Russian President Vladimir Putin. The political atmosphere in the United States has quickly turned xenophobic, bloodthirsty, and dark. And I just want to point out very quickly, you guys, can you imagine if following our invasion of Iraq, another a sitting senator or a sitting member of parliament or something from some other powerful country around the world advocated for assassinating George W. Bush? Imagine, just imagine what the United States response would be. Imagine. What if after we invaded Iraq and Afghanistan, same situation, another member of parliament or Congress or something from around the world came forward and said, we're going to deport all Americans? Can you imagine? Can you even imagine the response in the United States to such a thing? So it used to be called the Chomsky rule in international relations. If you flip the players and your opinion changes, you're not principled. You're just engaging in nationalism. And so I just wanted to point that out, that our Congress members, our senators say things that if they were said about our president would be taken as aggression. We have this sense of entitlement around the entire world, as though America should have some sort of control over other sovereign countries. And of course, when we invade those sovereign countries, that doesn't get any coverage. When we bomb people, it's like, oh, it doesn't matter, they're brown. Okay. Carrying on in Jacobin here. They got a Lindsey Graham tweet. Is there a Brutus in Russia? Is there a more successful Colonel Stauffenberg in the Russian military? The only way this ends is for somebody in Russia to take this guy out. You would be doing your country and the world a great service. Again, I want you to imagine that tweet coming from some, say, high-ranking Chinese official or something when we invaded Iraq and Afghanistan, saying, is there someone in the U.S. military that will assassinate George W. Bush? Because we got to take this guy out. Can you even fucking imagine? Can you imagine? While the United States has provided a great deal of military aid to Ukraine, direct action by the American government has so far been mostly restricted to economic sanctions. It's worth noting that not all sanctions are the same. Putin's government is waging a monstrous imperial war. While we should oppose any sanctions that add to the misery of working-class Russians, Targeted sanctions against individual Russian oligarchs are a different issue, just as it would have been hard to object if other powers had responded to the invasion of Iraq with targeted sanctions on politically connected American billionaires. I do, you guys, I want to dispel with the notion, I disagree with Ben in one respect here. I don't think it's as easy to control who gets hit by the sanctions as Ben seems to frame it. Because you can almost always, these oligarchs can almost always implement domestic policy that basically allows them to dodge the harm from the sanctions and pass it down to the poor and working class in their country. Okay, we've also already seen, supposedly the sanctions that we've engaged in were targeting the oligarchs. We've already seen issues with credit cards and ATMs and stuff in Russia, all sorts of issues actually. So these are hitting Russian civilians even when we attempted to target them to the oligarchs. I just want to dispel with the notion that sanctions can be targeted in such a way to only hit a cadre of oligarchs. That's just a misframing of how sanctions actually operate in most instances. Carrying on. But there's a pervasive atmosphere of jingoistic fervor, a sense of urgency that the United States do something. On the level of civil society, this has expressed itself throughout absurdities like the International Cat Federation banning Russian-bred cats from competition and petty or not so petty cruelties ranging from calls in the mixed martial arts world to ban Russian fighters to the oncology network pulling out of Russia. I guess if you can't punish Vladimir Putin, you can at least punish cancer patients who live in his country. Most disturbing, though, has been the parade of calls for American military intervention. In most cases, this takes the form of calls for the United States to set up a no-fly zone in Ukraine. A sitting U.S. congressman has made that call, so has a senator. Dan Hodges of the Mail on Sunday, the biggest selling Sunday paper in the UK, has said that not establishing a no-fly zone would be an act of appeasement, no different to our appeasement, oh, Jesus Christ, of Hitler in 1938. Give me a break. If anyone wants to compare this to Munich, you're out of your damn mind. You're out of your damn mind. So he carried on there. I encourage you all to read the rest of that article if you are so inclined. The point here is, you guys, a no-fly zone is meaningless unless you're going to shoot down Russian planes. That's an act of war. So unless you're going to go forward with starting World War III, then you really can't actually enact a no-fly zone. You certainly can't enforce it unless you want to start World War III. So what this is a way for these warmongering senators and leaders and the military-industrial complex and all that, and the press that wants to manufacture consent for this war. It's a way for them to say, we want to start World War III without actually saying we want to start World War III. And then, of course, if they implement a no-fly zone and then we end up shooting down a Russian jet, what they'll do is they'll fucking call that escalation on Russia's behalf. So our aggression will be framed as a defensive action, and then we'll use that as an excuse to fully engage with Russia. So again, you guys, keep full context in mind here, and don't allow the short little sound bits like no fly zone. Don't allow yourself to be convinced by that, or don't allow yourself to misunderstand what that actually means. That means we should start World War III. That's what these people are fucking saying. With a nuclear power, we should start World War III. I've seen articles like, one of them was like, maybe a small nuclear war would actually be good. I mean, it's you guys, we're at this, like, the press is a parody of themselves at this point. What they're doing is clearly just taking papers written by fucking Raytheon and fucking Lockheed Martin and Boeing and Northrop Grumman and just plastering it out to the public, publishing it on their paper as though it's some form of news or commentary of any sort. So I'm sorry I got a little bit worked up there, you guys, but this is just, I think if you're not worked up over this, there's something wrong. That is overt, brazen racism being admitted by the press, who we are supposed to trust. And I also want to point out on a second note, Lee Camp loses his fucking show, right? We can't platform Lee Camp, but we have no problem platforming overt racist. Overt racist. You know, it's the way that we pick and choose when to care about racism is incredible. It's absolutely incredible. When it's Donald Trump or someone who supports Donald Trump, then we can condemn it. But when it's some reporter at a reputable news organization like the BBC or PBS or what have you, then it's totally fucking fine to engage in overt, blatant racism in order to justify a war with Russia. How is that acceptable, but Lee Camp's show has to be canceled? It's absurd, you guys. And I recognize that was like part of a sanction. It's a little bit more complicated, but you guys get my point, right? We got to cancel any independent sources that are going to tell you the truth about this shit. But we can allow that racism to happen on BBC and PBS. That's fine. That's just fine. Why would we care about Yemen or Palestine, right? It's disgusting. It is disgusting. If it does not make your stomach churn, there is something seriously wrong with you and you should seek help. Okay? So that is what I wanted to talk about with Ukraine today, you guys. And we'll obviously keep up on that story, but I just wanted to put into perspective how the propaganda bio mission has worked here. We are far and away the worst perpetrators of violations of international law. It's not even close, but we have the gall here to say, well, Russia's not following international law. Again, our actions don't justify Putin's actions, you guys. I don't want to be misunderstood here. That is not a point. It's not like, well, we're bad, so he can be bad. That's not at all what I'm saying. I'm saying it's a story in and of itself, how the press has covered this, and you should be made aware of the overt racism that drives coverage and determines what matters to these people and what does not. And it's pretty clear that white people matter to these people and brown people and black people do not matter to these people. Let's just call it what it is, okay? Anyway, again, I apologize. I got a little bit worked up about that, you guys. So I'm going to show you guys here an interview that I recorded earlier today. This is with Sabrina Salvati, better known as Sabby Sabs of the Revolutionary Blackout Network. She was kind enough to join to discuss Biden's State of the Union address this past week. So this is Sabrina Salvati on Biden's State of the Union. Really encourage you guys. I have her Twitter and the Revolutionary Blackout Network's Twitter up on the screen throughout this interview. And I've also put their channels and Twitter handles in the description box. I really encourage you to follow their work. Absolutely fantastic stuff. This again, Sabrina Salvati on the State of the Union.
I'm very happy to be back with Sabrina Salvati, also known as Sabby Sabs of the Revolutionary Blackout Network. Sabrina, thank you as always for taking the time to be here.
Thanks so much for having me on, Luke.
So if you wanted to just start by giving your broad thoughts on Biden's State of the Union, and how you think he did, how you think it relates to reality, so to say, and what you think the state of the country is compared to how he portrayed it.
I think when I think back on the State of the Union address, and we actually did a live stream of this while it was occurring on RBN as well, I think I just heard a lot of empty promises. And some of the things that he mentioned, some of the policies that Joe Biden mentioned, those are things that he can do by executive order. And I felt like he was trying to put the blame on Kyrsten Sinema, Joe Manchin, and basically saying, we just got to pass this bill, right? But some of those things he can do himself. And I think that was left out of that speech. I was incredibly, I guess I shouldn't say disappointed at this point, but I was incredibly, let's just say not happy about him bragging about funding the police more. I guess I shouldn't expect anything different from him, but considering everything that's happened in this past 2 years, that is not something that I feel that he should brag about at this point. So he said the quiet part out loud. Meanwhile, you still have people who are struggling in this country financially. Some people are still unemployed. Some people are housing insecure in this country. So I think that, again, he's not addressing the real concerns that Americans are having to deal with in this country today. And to me, it just seemed like there was a lot of emphasis on the Russia-Ukraine crisis, obviously, and making it seem like the United States government is doing the right thing, totally leaving out the fact that the United States government is part of the reason why they are in this conflict to begin with. And Joe Biden didn't mention that. And to see everybody in the audience like wearing the Ukraine like ribbons or holding up the flags, I had to ask myself, like, what about the people in Somalia, which the United States government just bombed like a week and a half ago? What about people in Yemen? What about people in Afghanistan that are starving because of the sanctions that have been placed on them by the United States government? So to me, it just seems like there seems to be some type of favoritism when it comes to standing up for people abroad. And I don't feel that when it comes to brown people abroad, the United States government doesn't seem to care.
Yeah, I don't know if you saw, but I'll just for the audience, Alan McLeod had posted this thread of journalists basically admitting that the reason they cared about Ukraine was that they're racist. I mean, one of them had to apologize because he literally said the reason this hits home is because it's kids with blonde hair and blue eyes. So, you know, I mean, they're out and out admitting the reason there's emphasis on Ukraine and not emphasis on Yemen or Palestine or Iraq or Afghanistan or Syria or Pakistan or Somalia or any of the others. I think that it was absolutely disgusting to see. You mentioned the defund the police, and I something caught my eye. The way that MSNBC covered it, they showed the applause, right, from Pelosi and Harris, and you hear the applause. Then they zoomed in on Mitch McConnell. And the reason I thought this was very interesting is because it's almost an admission that they think it's a gotcha to grovel to the Republicans. Like they seem to think that was some sort of a win for Democrats, that we have completely capitulated to the Republican position. And to be fair, Biden and Democrats never really took the right position. But I you know, you see what I mean? It's like they think groveling to the right-wing maniacs is the right political strategy or something. I was hoping you could speak to the mentality about defund the police in the media.
Oh boy. I think that for whatever reason, the Democratic Party seems to want to get the approval of the Republican Party. And you never see this happen the other way around. They're so busy trying to work on bipartisanship and get their approval. Meanwhile, Republicans are like, this is our position and this is what we're going to go by, regardless if the Democrats agree with it or not. The Democratic Party doesn't do that. They are constantly trying to get their approval. And that has to tell you something about the two-party system. Now, I think that it's no surprise to me that mainstream media would zoom in on Mitch McConnell, because they're really like missing the point here. They're missing the plot. That is not something that should have been celebrated. And seeing people like Jim Clyburn and Maxine Waters applaud this, that just goes to show you that at the end of the day, the Democratic Party really doesn't care about the American people. Now, Jim Clyburn and Maxine Waters, these are people who stood for civil rights at one point in this country. They like to brag about what they've done for civil rights movements in the past. But if you look at what they're doing today and what their position is today, it kind of like negates what they did before for civil rights, because now they are for the police state. They are for the police state right now because the party that's in power, the Democratic Party, wants to fund the police state. When it was Trump who was in office, when the Republicans were in power, they took the opposite position. And that just goes to show you there's a lot of hypocrisy. And it's more so about what works for your party and not so much about what works for the American people. So I just think this was an embarrassment to the Biden administration, to Democrats. I know a lot of young people, especially young Black people, are not happy with the statement that Joe Biden made about funding the police more. So I think that all I have to say is come 2024, I think this is going to be a big wake up call for them. But it seems like to me, there's also a generational divide. The people who are applauding that seem to be of an older generation. And that's exactly what we saw in that audience that night. So I just think they're just shooting themselves in the foot.
Yeah, and I think one thing worth noting, it seems like they think they need to capitulate to Republicans to win office, but at the same time, they also admit, and they're correct too, that they don't win without the Black vote. And Biden's approval among Black Americans is, last I saw, down in the 60s. Democrats don't win with 60-some% favorability among the Black community. So I was hoping you could speak a little bit to his complete he didn't even, when he said we want to fund the police, he didn't even add the bullshit caveat of like, but I want to reform them, or I want to, you know, like he didn't even try to rhetorically appease a community that he desperately needs. It just, to me, is incredibly insulting. I'm hoping you can speak a little bit to how the Black community views Biden and how that might affect his chances in 2024.
Yes, he didn't try to say anything that would lift up the Black community. Instead, a lot of his policies actually hurt the Black community. And here he is bragging about funding the police again. This just goes to show you how lost they are, how clueless they are. They don't really care about the Black community. They only care about Black people when it's time for us to vote. And I think this may be the turning of the tide. At 2024, if things continue the way that they are, I think this may be a telling moment. What I want people to understand is it's not like the majority of the Black community is crazy in love with Joe Biden. He was running against Donald Trump, and people were so angry with Donald Trump, they just wanted him out. So I think that regardless who would have taken that position, and this is why it's so incredibly important to note that if Bernie Sanders would have gotten the nomination, I still think Bernie Sanders could have won, because at that point, there were more people that I spoke to, Black Americans, that said they weren't really voting for Joe Biden per se. They just wanted Trump out. So that's what people have to understand. There's no Trump in office this time around. And he's not only losing support amongst Black voters, but this one's incredibly significant. He's losing support among Black male voters, particularly. And that is going to be very telling, I think, come 2024. I think, I received a document the other day, a petition of someone asking me to sign this about reparations, and that they're refusing to vote for Democrats unless reparations are implemented. So things are a little bit different this time around. People are seeing that their communities have not improved. Nothing has changed that is going to really help and benefit the lives of Black communities in this country. So I think that Joe Biden might be in for a wake-up call, and that's good. I think that needs to happen. I think we need to stop letting the Democratic Party think that they automatically get our vote just because they're the lesser of two evils.
Yeah, absolutely. You got to earn it. That's absolutely. I was also hoping you could talk about, you mentioned the hollow promises, where a lot of his speech was essentially him saying things that he didn't even try very hard to do, things he could do by executive order, things he did not use the bully pulpit to try to force through, and things that we all watched fail, over the course of a year. So it seemed like he was just kind of doing this very performative virtue signal. And yet at the same time, he also slammed deficits and tried to say, we're going to cut into the deficit. So it's like, well, Joe, how are you going to pay for these social programs that you seem to, right? If you're going to take an approach that MMT proves is completely incorrect, that these deficits are somehow inherently bad, then how are you going to pay for your social programs? He seems to have a contradiction there, and I'm hoping you can talk a little bit to the deficit hawkery that is not only harmful to the Black community and racial minority communities, but also just the impoverished community in general and working class people in general, and how that affects the Democrats' rhetoric and positions.
Well, it was interesting to me. He said that we need to cut costs instead of saying we need to pay everyone a living wage. So that fail to me, that's just a fail right there. He didn't mention anything about student loan debt, which is incredibly important. And again, this is one thing I agree with AOC on. She said, if you don't cancel student loan debt, Democrats are going to lose come 2024. I agree with that. So nothing about that. Nothing about Medicare for all. These are the things that people really need in this country. And the fact, I felt like that speech focused heavily on the conflict that is happening with Russia and Ukraine. He talked a lot about, again, funding the police. He talked about we got to cut the costs. We got to tax the billionaires more. We already know these things. The problem is it's not being done. So again, he's just standing up, giving the same kind of speech that he's given before. We need to make the wealthy pay more and yada, yada, all that stuff. But what has he done about it? He's done nothing about it. He can cancel student loan debt by executive order. He can implement Medicare for all for everyone in this country by executive order, which he's choosing not to do. He can do the same thing that they did in Libby, Montana, and they can use the excuse that because we were in a pandemic, they can actually implement this. So for him to he threw it back on the Build Back Better bill. He threw it back on that instead of just acknowledging that these are some things he can do himself. And that's on purpose, by the way. He doesn't really want to do these things. He knows that Wall Street, he knows that corporations are not going to be okay with that. He knows the pharmaceutical companies are a huge problem, but he accepts their donations. So he's never going to side against the people who are his donors. And I think this is what's problematic about the two-party system. And I brought this up multiple times. Until someone comes to me with a way to get the money out, I really don't want to hear about running candidates through this two-party system, whether they're progressive or not, because even if the candidate is not taking corporate money, the party that they are going into is taking corporate money. Nancy Pelosi takes corporate money. So you're going into a party that is owned by Wall Street, and you are not going to change the corporation, and the Democratic Party is a corporation. So I think the thing that needs to be focused on is how are you going to get the money out? And if you don't have a way to do that, I think people need to start voting third party or independent, because this system is not going to change. It's going to be very difficult to change. And I think that's why we see a lot of people that came in as progressive candidates not really doing anything. not really fighting for us. Jamal Bowman at the State of the Union address, shaking Joe Biden's hand, saying, I'm trying to be like you. This is absolutely embarrassing to the progressive movement. These candidates said they were totally fine with being a one-term congressperson. And now we see that that is not true. They went into a party that's corrupted, and now they are corrupted.
Yeah, that moment with Jamal Bowman made my stomach physically lurch. It was like, you have got to be kidding me. I mean, another one that just completely capitulates to the. It really made my stomach. Yeah, that was bad. You mentioned the money and the corruption, and I was hoping to talk about one specific thing that I noticed was left out of the speech, even though Biden purportedly does support this and actually has never engaged in it himself. One very few, I guess a broken clock is right twice a day. That is the stock trading stuff. Biden has, ever since he joined the Senate, he took the position that he was not going to engage in trades while he was in public office. He seems to support banning Congress from trading stock, but he's also got Nancy Pelosi over his shoulder, who engages in this quite a bit with her bigwig investor husband. And that did not get one single mention, not even a hollow rhetorical mention during the speech. I'm hoping you can talk about that and corruption more broadly and how little attention that gets in the Democratic Party.
Well, he definitely wasn't going to mention that because he had Nancy Pelosi sitting right behind him. And this is another thing, like they play to their party. They know that there are politicians that are doing this, whether Joe Biden agrees with it or not. Joe Biden is weak. He is not. I think the videos that we saw of Joe Biden from the early 90s, that was a stronger side of him. We don't see that side of him right now. And I think that Joe Biden was bought and paid for a long time ago. When it comes to the money and the corruption, basically, long story short, both Democrats and Republicans in DC, they can go to the same country club. We cannot. At the end of the day, they can do bipartisanship. They can have lunches together with their families. Their kids can go to the same school and play together. It's all about protecting the status quo. So Joe Biden's job is to get on television and say things that will make people feel good, but not to actually implement them. And then when these policies are not implemented, he'll just do the same thing that Obama did. He'll use the excuse, and this will happen come 2022 when Republicans take back the House and the Senate. He's going to use the excuse that the reason why these policies were not implemented is because Republicans had control of the House and the Senate. And so I'm here to remind people that Democrats have control of the House and the Senate right now. And they're not passing this type of legislation. And it's not just Kyrsten Sinema and Joe Manchin. Nina Turner said this herself on Breaking Point. She said it's not just those two. There are others who also have a problem with these bills. But Kyrsten Sinema and Joe Manchin are the ones who are willing to come forward. And that's because they're in districts where they're pretty much protected. They can get reelected again, regardless if they pass this or not. So at the end of the day, this is all about money. And the Democratic Party, these candidates, they'll continue to fundraise. That's really their goal, is just to fundraise. I got a text message from Nancy Pelosi a couple weeks ago asking me for money. And I don't know how that happened because I've never donated to Nancy Pelosi. So it appears to me that I feel like a lot of people are not talking about the money issue, which is surprising considering that was something that Bernie Sanders' campaign focused heavily on. They're not talking about it. And until they start having those deep discussions about here is the money, this is why it's a problem, they need to talk about the fact that why are billionaires donating to progressive organizations? Like, why are they not talking about that? So until they start to have those deep conversations and break down those talking points, I think that people will continue to be blindly led into the Democratic Party and continue voting for the duopoly, unfortunately.
Yeah, they have a monopoly on it of sorts, or a duopoly is the better term. You mentioned sort of the performative nature of we're going to get up and say these things, and we know we have to just get up and say these things. I was hoping to point out how detached from reality instances like this are. There was this moment where you good? Okay. There was this moment where Joe said that he wanted to tax the rich, and he got booed loudly by Republicans. And it just, the reason it kind of caught my attention is it put into focus how out of touch the discussions that they are having are from the discussions that we, the people, are having are, right? What percent? 80% of the country supports taxing the rich or something like that, but you get half of the chamber booing when Biden says tax the rich, right? It just, to me, it indicates how completely and thoroughly detached from reality Congress and this administration are. Can you speak a little bit to that?
But Joe Biden, again, is just virtue signaling. Like, he doesn't
Yeah.
really want to tax the rich either. That's the thing I want people to realize. Like, he doesn't really want to tax the rich either, because that would include Wall Street. That would include like the corporations that are, some of them are his donors. That would include big pharma. That would include some of the senators and some of the congressmen and women too. So he doesn't really want to do that. Right now, what he's trying to do is say those same talking points so that younger people will come on board again, and so that people who are progressive will come on board again for Joe Biden. He's not going to, I will be shocked if that happens. And the reality is, I don't think that members of his party are going to let that happen either. So it's just the reality of the situation. Like, a lot of times these are just talking points. They're just saying what they need to say so that they can get reelected again. And another thing we need to think about too is Joe Biden's approval rating is incredibly low. Now, I know that it has increased since the State of the Union address, but again, that's because he gave these talking points. I think this is going to be a really telling moment. I'm already seeing what's happening in the Texas race. We saw what happened in Virginia for the governor race. Democrats are no longer the party of working class people. And there is no party right now of working class people that is actually putting candidates through. Now, I know there's moving for a People's Party. They're not running candidates yet. We have the Green Party. I think we need the Green Party to be a bit louder, a little bit more stronger. The fact that Jill Stein was on the ballot in 48 states, and we had large progressive outlets like TYT telling people to vote for Hillary Clinton, that's suspect to me, because that was a moment when we actually could have implemented change. So I think what's going to have to happen is, I think that the American people are going to have to deprogram their minds and get it away from voting for the duopoly. And we have been conditioned to do that there's these two parties and we need to pick one. There's not. There's other parties, there's independent candidates, and I think people need to do something different, because we've been playing the same game for years and it's really not getting us anywhere.
Absolutely. And Democrats even resist when progressives run in their own part. I mean, they resist any sort of pushback to their. So yeah, I'm 100% in agreement. The institution itself is spoiled. And, I'm a throw the kitchen sink at it kind of guy. I want good people running in all sorts of different, I'll vote green or independent, if you know what I mean. I'm throw the kitchen sink at the problem. I did want to ask you about something that I think is, I want to be careful how I put this, but literally the faculties of Joe Biden and Nancy Pelosi were very clearly they're just not vigorous and seemingly capable of doing their jobs at this point. And a lot of people try to put this back on Joe Biden's stutter that he had as a child. I'm incredibly sympathetic to anybody who struggles with something like that. But I think we all saw during the Obama era, and you mentioned the late 90s, he was up there giving rousing speeches of cracking down on the black community and throwing people in cages, right? There was no stutter there. There was no hesitancy there. There was no weakness there. I think we've all seen quite a change. Pelosi kind of awkwardly standing up and rubbing her hands and things a couple times. And it was just very, very, I know this is supposed to be kind of out of bounds to a lot of the mainstream press, but I was hoping you could talk to it doesn't seem to me like our leaders, by the way, when we're potentially on the verge of nuclear war, have the faculties to be doing their job. Can you speak a little bit to that?
Yes. I mean, I do not think that, and I said this actually during the primary debates with Joe Biden, I don't think that Joe Biden right now has the capacity to be leading this country. I don't know what's going on with Nancy Pelosi. She has been acting rather strange. But some of the things that Joe Biden has said, whether it was during the debate primaries, whether it's during these town halls that he's had after he was elected as president, there seems to be a cognitive decline. Mm-hmm. And I'm not a doctor. Obviously, I can't, I technically can't diagnose him per se. Yeah. But just based on what I've seen, there does seem to be some type of cognitive decline. Now, this is the person who is leading the country. And that is very concerning. What are they going to do in terms of decision making? Are they making rash decisions? Are they making harsh decisions? I mean, I don't know about everybody else, but economically, things are still not good. Things are getting worse, especially for people who are working class. I mean, I went to go get gas the other day and gas is ridiculously high. The grocery store prices are astronomical, and this is going to get worse. And I think that people need to bring these things up. So the way that they go about talking about it is blaming the companies and saying that they need to lower their prices. But why are the prices high to begin with? This didn't just start. Like the prices have always been an issue, but they increased after the pandemic started. And it's troublesome because, like I said before, you had so many people who have been laid off. They don't have their jobs anymore. Their employers have shut down. I know in Boston, if you were a waitress or a bartender, there were a lot of businesses here that closed, strong, good businesses that closed. And so a lot of people just found themselves like out on the street. And then they eliminated unemployment in September on Labor Day. They kicked all those people off of unemployment. And so to me, it's just, along with that, you are going to increase prices. Like, how are people supposed to live? How are people supposed to survive? And it just seems like, to me, again, it is very dangerous that this is the person that we have that's running the country. And sometimes when Joe Biden's speaking, is very apparent he doesn't even know where he is half of the time. Yeah. And I've said this before, but Joe Biden should have never been the nominee for the Democratic Party. I know we can't go back and change things, but even going back to the Democratic debates, like how desperate could the American people have been to still vote for him in the primaries when we saw his decline on the stage during the debates?
Yeah. Or calling, what did he call a supporter, lion dog faced pony soldier or something? I mean, there were some moments where it was like, what in the hell are you even like? Absolutely the case. And you mentioned inflation there. I think what's interesting is that lawmakers seem to forget their role here as regulators. And there's like this tendency to, it absolutely is price gouging, right? We all know that businesses are going to price gouge whenever they have the opportunity to. But where's the role as lawmakers to alter the laws and regulations such, right, that companies can't engage in that kind of price making? Can you talk about how these members of Congress like to kind of deflect their responsibility off and pretend that they have no role in things when very clearly they are setting the rules to the game? I mean, I would liken it to if you and I are sitting down to play a board game and a third person gets to stand there and make the rules up as we go. Like, obviously that person has a profound influence on who's going to win the game, right? So it seems like lawmakers forget that their role is to literally set the rules and set the laws and regulations.
100%. And I think if we were playing the game of Monopoly, let's all remember how that game goes. One person usually ends up buying up most of the properties. And then whoever is playing against them, you're left with, look, that's how you win the game. You have to buy up more properties. You have to accumulate more money. And I think that's what we're experiencing right now in this country. I think the American people are fed up, are exhausted, but I think the problem is the message that is coming across and the people who are delivering that message on mainstream media tend to be people who are comfortable, tend to be people who are of a certain class. And I'll give you an example. Al Sharpton was on Morning Joe probably about 2 weeks ago, complaining about the fact that his toothpaste is locked up in some of the convenience stores because the crime rate is high, because people are stealing. And not once in that conversation did they mention the poverty issue. They just talked about crime, and crime and poverty are connected. So they'll bring on people like Al Sharpton. Al Sharpton is wealthy. They'll bring on people of a certain class that are going to have the narrative and the talking points that MSNBC and CNN actually want to hear. They're not going to bring on people who are actually working class that are having to struggle. And so this is one of the things that I try to be careful about with my show as well. I try to make sure that you hear from people who are of a different class so you can hear what it's actually like from that person, not from people who are wealthy, who are telling you, oh, well, working class people need this and working class people need that. You need to hear from those actual people. But the biggest problem that we have is like they're still not addressing the fact that the American people, for the most part, do not have a living wage. Look, we saw what happened last year with the vote for $15 minimum wage. We had Democrats vote against that. And I hope that that was a wake-up call for a lot of people. That goes to show you that Democrats and Republicans, at the end of the day, they're there to serve corporations and Wall Street. They're not there to actually help the American people. It is disgusting that we still have $7.25 an hour, I believe it is, for federal minimum wage in this country. Nobody,
it's like a third of the living wage, maybe. I mean, it's insane.
Yeah, no one can live off of that. They didn't even want to give you a $15 minimum wage, but they gave the military industrial complex $268 billion. So now is the time for people to really pay attention to what is going on. And I think because we had a pandemic, I think more people have woken up, so to speak, because they've been directly affected. But if you're not directly affected, for the most part, you can just shrug your shoulders at this and continue to live your life. But I'm going to the grocery store. Why is it, if you just want to get like a package of ground beef, why is this $7? So this is a problem. And I think that Joe Biden and Nancy Pelosi, at the end of the day, they're going to do what their donors want them to do. And hopefully people really wake up to this and they stop voting for these parties, because if they're not going to help you during a pandemic, when are they going to help you?
Yeah, never. Yeah, that's never. They'll exploit the pandemic when they want to, but they also won't help people during the pandemic. And yeah, just to double down on the food point, I know I get up here and put a blazer on and do this show, but I am a line cook, and we've seen an incredible decline. Increase in food costs. So that it's hitting everybody. I mean, it's, you know, and also as a line cook, I don't exactly have a humongous bank account to go out and buy nice food for myself, right? So and there's no addressing that problem whatsoever. And to double down on the $15 thing as well, they hid behind a powerless advisor. The parliamentarian has no power at all. They hid behind that person. What did Bush do in the early 2000s and the Republicans do when parliamentarians said they couldn't do their tax cuts? They fired him and replaced him. So why the Democrats are just completely feckless and weak in every possible regard. That's really a misframing. They're choosing to hide behind a false narrative is maybe the better way to put it. I lost my train of thought. Where was I going to go with that? $15. You mentioned that Al Sharpton clip. I didn't see that, but I wanted to ask you about. It's amazing to me how the framing there is poor Al Sharpton has to go get an attendant to get his toothpaste instead of poor Americans who can't afford toothpaste. And this reminds me of how we fearmonger about crime rates and things like that when police steal more in asset forfeiture than burglars steal. Like so the big picture stuff is completely left out, right? How much of your labor is stolen from by your boss and the corporation you work for? So all that kind of theft, all that high level theft that screws over working class people is completely left out of the discussion, and we fearmonger about these tiny little micro things. I was hoping you could talk about those narratives a little bit.
Right. Well, typically what they like to do is they like to put the blame on the people who are suffering instead of putting the blame on the people who have the money and have the means and the resources to make these changes. That's usually what they do. They criminalize the victims instead of criminalizing the people who are actually the real crooks and who are really corrupt. And that's done on purpose because they don't want you to see that crime and poverty are connected. They don't want the American people to have this understanding that most crime is poverty driven. Because then people will question, well, how do we fix the poverty issue? And then that brings things back to capitalism. So what they choose to do is they respond with the establishment response, which is, well, if there's high crime, we need more police officers to fix and control the crime, instead of fixing the issue that is causing the crime. And what they'll do is they'll give out these meaningless programs that kind of keep people in poverty stuck where they are. So yes, you may be able to get like food stamps. You may be able to get some assistance with childcare, Section 8 housing, but those programs don't help people get out of poverty. That's the problem. So it keeps them stuck where they are. And the few that do get out of poverty, they're outliers. A lot of times they have help from someone else, but the majority don't. And so you have to end the cycle of poverty. The fact that we're one of the wealthiest countries in the world, and we have all of these people living in poverty. There's some neighborhoods I've been to in this country, and it was appalling to me that this was happening in the United States. And people, a lot of times they talk about what's happening in other countries, how there's poverty as well. But I can take you to a couple of neighborhoods that I've been to, and you would be surprised that people are living this way in the United States. Paula Jean Swearengin mentioned this as well. Living in West Virginia, they also have a high poverty rate. So I think they are purposely not trying to solve the poverty issue, because at the end of the day, they still want people who are part of the ruling class to keep their position and to keep their power. So you have so much wealth that is concentrated at the top, and the people at the bottom are constantly exploited. And that's why you have people who have some of these jobs where they're working like 40 hours, 50 hours a week, and they're still just barely getting by. And if you're working that many hours a week and you can't afford to put money aside for savings, like that's disgusting. And in the one of the wealthiest countries like in the world, but that's done on purpose. They want to keep you at the bottom. And I wish more people would talk about the capitalist problem, the problem with capitalism, because that's what capitalism does. It exploits the people at the bottom, and the people at the top, they're the ones concentrated with all the wealth, and they're living just fine. The people at the bottom oftentimes have to work harder, longer hours, and that's just to get by. They never give you enough to get out of that situation. They just give you enough to keep you where you are.
Yeah, capitalism is by definition, capitalism is exploitation. That you have to be exploiting workers in a capitalistic system. There's no other way around that. It is exploitation by definition. To pivot to something a little bit more cheery and hopeful, I have found inspiration in covering this labor movement every week. The Starbucks stuff, the strikes across the country, unionization efforts, all that kind of stuff. The walkouts, like seeing all this. I know it's kind of anecdotal, but you see all these posts of people finally kind of wielding power and standing up to their employer a little bit. And I'm hopeful that might start to kind of chip away at what you were just talking about, right? The way that working class people and poor people are treated in this country, that we might be able to sort of wield some power here. Can you talk about the labor movement and how that can be a catalyst for progressives?
I think that working class people need to understand that they have more power than they may think. Look at all of the strikes that have happened over the past year: John Deere, Starbucks. I know we had union leaders on RBN from Kellogg's. The nurses here in Massachusetts were on strike for 10 months at St. Vincent's Hospital. They had finally won their concessions. I think that this is what happens when the working class people come together and rise up. And you have to put pressure on the people who are in charge. You have to put pressure on leadership, the CEOs, who, by the way, their wealth doubled during the pandemic. You have to let them know, if you don't change things for us, we're going to walk. And it can't just be one person that's doing it. Everyone needs to come together. You need a lot of people. Now, if you have a union, this is a little bit easier to do. If you don't have a union, though, you can still do this. A lot of people can come together. What are they going to do? They can't replace everybody immediately. And I think that's what people need to realize. And some people have said, well, they'll just bring in workers from elsewhere. Not immediately. It doesn't happen that fast. That's why you need to have strength in numbers. You need more and more people to rise up and do this. What I would have liked to have seen was all of these different unions across the United States coming together and doing one big, large strike together. One large strike, and call it the working class strike, the labor strike. That's something I think we really need. But in order to actually implement change that is going to greatly affect CEOs and corporate leaders in this country, you have to shut down transportation. You have to shut down the ports. You have to do like exactly what the truckers are doing in Canada. You have to stop the flow of goods. And if you can disrupt that, then I think you will see significant change. But it's not enough just to say, I'm not going to order from Amazon anymore. Like that alone is not really going to hurt Jeff Bezos. What would hurt Jeff Bezos is if you stop the transportation of goods, because that's the thing with Amazon. What do? They ship you products, right? You have to stop that. And I think if this truckers convoy, and I know that some people approve of it, some people don't, but if this continues throughout the United States, I think you may see some changes.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's an example of wielding power, right? I mean, I certainly have my disagreements with quite a few of the leaders who have some very unsavory beliefs, to say the very least. And you know, but they have shown how effective, you know, the like you said, the shipping industry, you can shut everything down very quickly if you hit the ports and truckers and maybe pilots or whatever. Like you can shut things down very quickly if you hit those industries. And I'm hopeful, because this labor movement is picking up like this, that we might get to some of those industries eventually. But can you speak a little bit to like what can people do to support this stuff? I'm big on mutual aid. I'm big on like we need to prepare for, like you kind of mentioned, more of a general strike, or at least a very prominent strike. If that's going to happen, there's going to be a lot of poor and working class people who don't have their income anymore and have to sacrifice their income temporarily to do this. So what are the things we can do to build up the infrastructure that we need to succeed in such an effort? For, you know that the capitalists are going to drag it out as long as possible and try to basically wait us out, right? So like how do we prepare ourselves for what would undoubtedly be, you know, well beyond the union busting practices that we've seen thus far? They would throw the kitchen sink at us. How do we prepare for that?
We would definitely have to help them with mutual aid. That's going to be a tremendous help to them. A lot of times, I don't know if everyone's aware of this, but a lot of times when these unions go on strike, they actually have some type of mutual aid set up or in place. So I saw this with the coal miners that were on strike in Alabama. They were showing the whole mutual aid process that they had set up. And so that's how we can help them. They're going to need food. They're going to need help paying their rent or their mortgage. And so in order to do that, you would need to contact the people who are responsible, who are in charge. They're usually on social media. They'll have their contact information there of how you can help, and reach out to them and help them, whether it's through a GoFundMe, or actually I prefer people be careful with GoFundMes per se, but they'll usually have some type of link where you can help support what they're doing. And I think there are some of us in position that can do that. But even if you can't send money, food, clothing, like just basic needs that people need so that they can get through a strike like this, because that's the big thing. Like the United States government is not expecting us to help each other. They don't want us to help each other. They're thinking that's the furthest thing from our mind, right? So what they tend to do is they keep us divided based on left versus right, so that we don't focus on the class issue. We don't focus on the workers, the labor rights that people need in this country. So I think that if we can turn the television off and focus on helping people who are working class, who are part of these labor movements, not thinking about left versus right, then we can really have a movement. And they don't want that. So that's why it's their job to divide us among other issues. So I think mutual aid is definitely 100% going to be the most important, because they will need to be able to take care of their basic needs as well.
Yeah, they deflect from class with the demagoguery, right? They take 99% of the cake and then tell us to fight over the rest, and it's the immigrants' fault that you don't get a bigger slice, and try to make us fight amongst ourselves, right? It's yeah. So the last thing I wanted to ask you about, Sabby, is just can you talk a little bit about Revolutionary Blackout Network and what you guys do? I encourage all of my viewers to follow Sabrina's show on YouTube, Sabby Sabs, and the other content there on Revolutionary Blackout Network. I think it just, frankly, I mean, even in leftist circles, I don't think we prop up Black commentators enough. And I really support what you guys are doing. So can you talk a little bit about where people can find and support your work?
Absolutely. So Revolutionary Blackout Network is on YouTube. We're also on Rockfin. And there's a group of us, and each of us have our own individual channels as well. So my channel is Sabby Sabs. And what we do is we focus on the duopoly. And just getting people out of it and showing people that both of these parties at the end of the day are the same. They're both corporate. And so we are trying to break that and get people out of the duopoly and push them towards direct action and mutual aid, and push them towards, if they still want to vote, voting for third party candidates or voting for independent candidates. Our goal is to wake people up, because for a long time, we have just been conditioned to vote for these two parties, nothing changes, nothing improves in our lives unless you're, of a certain class. And to also amplify that the Black community has been neglected in this country time and time again. So we do give that perspective as well as what it's like to be Black commentators and what it's like just to be Black in America and the things and the resources that are missing from the Black community. And I think that is something that's not talked about enough sometimes, especially even in like leftist commentary. So we were here to fill that void. We felt like you have all these voices out there still telling you to put progressive through the Democratic Party. And then you have other voices who are telling you to definitely vote blue no matter who. Well, we don't fit in either one of those lanes. And so we're here to give you a different idea, to give you a different strategy, and to teach you about helping people in your community, which some of these things we can do on our own. We don't need policy to be passed to get these things done. So that is our goal. We're trying to teach people to be self-sufficient and to work together as a community. Also things like grow your own food. Like we're trying to teach people how we can save each other and not rely on politicians.
Fantastic stuff. I'm a big believer in direct action. I'm not a throw away the electoral politics kind of a guy, but I think direct action drives all of it, no matter how you look at electoral politics. And I really support everything that you guys are doing. Encourage my audience to check out all of their fantastic content. I've had the Twitter handle for Sabby and for Revolutionary Blackout Network up on the screen, and I'm going to put links in the description box here. So please go follow them and their fantastic content. Sabrina, it was great to have you as always. I really appreciate you taking the time to be here.
Thanks so much, Luke.
So wonderful stuff from Sabrina and RBN as always. Really encourage you, as I said at the end there, please go follow them and subscribe to their channels. And they have all sorts of great content out there. Also want to give a huge shout out to Bad Mama Jamma and to Virginia for the super chats. Quick reminder, you guys, we are a 501c3 and a 501c4. And any little bit does help us very much to engage in the media and education spheres that we try to do some work in here. So huge shout out to the super chats. If you guys can drop a super chat or go to our website, realprogressives.org/donate to help us out, we very much appreciate it. I want to apologize for my sound through the first portion of this show, you guys. I screwed up my mic settings and somehow had it set in StreamYard that I was talking through my fucking laptop. So apologies for the sound. I hope that it is fixed now. And hopefully we can have a little smoother run for the rest of the show, right? So to kind of carry on with the topic that we were just talking about with Sabrina, I want to show you guys a clip here of Pramila Jayapal being pressed by Mehdi Hasan on their inability to get the Build Back Better bill passed, the reconciliation bill passed. Jayapal had recently gone on, not recently, months ago, had gone on Mehdi's show and insisted that their strategy of working inside was going to be successful, that they had assurances from the major players involved, Biden and Manchin, etc., and that their strategy was going to get this bill passed. She was very insistent about it, and huge credit to Mehdi for pressing her on that. He showed this clip of her and pressed her on it again, and quite frankly, I thought that Pramila's answer was absolutely terrible. So we're going to show you this clip, and then I'm going to dive into my view on her response. This is Pramila Jayapal on Mehdi Hasan's show trying to explain why their inside strategy didn't work.
Congresswoman, turning now to Biden's domestic agenda, he's obviously not been able to get as much of it passed as he wanted to, thanks to Joe Manchin, Kyrsten Sinema, and the Senate filibuster. When we spoke, you and I, back in December, I asked you about the Build Back Better legislation, and you said this. Have a listen.
I do still believe that he is going to do what he told me and what he told our caucus and what he told the country he would do.
And if he doesn't?
No, we're going to do it. We're going to do it. It will hurt everybody. Families
just to be clear, you're going to pass Build Back Better by December the 31st.
We are going to pass Build Back Better. I hope it is by December 31st. I think it will be.
But Build Back Better is now effectively dead, is it not, Congresswoman? It was declared dead on live TV by Joe Manchin just a few weeks ago.
It's painful, isn't it, to listen to that? I think that it is not dead in terms of some form. I still believe that that is possible, but obviously we have run into a real roadblock here with one senator. And my belief is still that we can pass, particularly the pieces, I think, that we do have some agreement around: climate change investment, $500 billion, the healthcare investments potentially, and the care economy, some pieces of the care economy. We are going to continue to push for that. I know the president is still pushing for that, but obviously it is not it's not where we want it to be. And I think we are still hopeful that whatever you want to call it, whatever name it is, that we will still pass a significant piece of Build Back Better. It's just not on the timeline that I had hoped for. That's for sure.
I don't think these these progressives have any idea how little faith their own base has in them at this point. I genuinely don't think that they have any idea. That was an opportunity for Pramila to say, I was wrong. I never should have trusted those people, and lesson learned, it will not happen again. That was an opportunity for her to say, you actually can trust me because I recognize my mistake. And instead, she doubled down. That's insane. And further capitulated to the corporate Democrats and the Republicans by saying, well, I still hope to get some of it past incrementalism. That is not what progressives were sent to DC to do. So what an absolutely embarrassing answer from Pramila Jayapal. What a horrific state of events that they allowed to occur by trusting Joe Biden, Joe Manchin, Kyrsten Sinema, and others, by the way. You know, the John Testers of the world and the Chris Coons of the world, etc. So, you know, I wanted to play that clip because I think it indicates how little idea these progressives have about how little trust we have in them. That is exactly our big complaint. Whatever you think of the intention of these individual legislators, even if you think the very best of their intentions, they are weak and feckless, and they just demonstrated it again. They get pummeled, and they say, yes, please, I'll have another. There's no striking back. There's no hardball. There's no admission our strategy didn't work and we need to take a different approach. There's no, like, next time we have an opportunity to pass something, we won't make the same mistake. So thoroughly embarrassing answer there from Pramila. And I do want to shout out Mehdi Hassan for pressing her on that. That is, you know, I wish there was more of that in these platforms that a lot of people seem to watch. So just humiliating answer there, you guys. And you know, it was such an opportunity to be like, I know we fucked up. And instead she's like, let me double down. Embarrassing, humiliating stuff. And I thought that kind of tied in nicely with the topics that we were talking with Sabrina about just a little bit ago. So shame on Pramila Jayapal for that one, you guys, and these progressives. I think my audience probably does know that I try to take a nuanced view on the progressive politicians, and you know what I mean. I try to give them credit when I think they're doing good things, and I condemn them when I think that they're being weak or taking a bad strategy or what have you. And in this case, that was an admission that they don't even understand why they failed here, and that's outrageous, you guys. A toddler could look at this and figure out why they failed here. So, you know, maybe she knows and she just felt like she had to double down. But in either case, that was an absolutely terrible answer from Pramila Jayapal. You know, and good on Mehdi Hassan for pressing her on it. So it goes to show you that what Sabrina was saying about, you know, the direct action is what drives change, and what Eric was saying earlier about we need to be in the streets driving this change, right? That even Obama and Bernie and people like that have acknowledged, like, you have to make me do this. So, you know, that's what we're going to have to do, you guys. That's what we're going to have to do. I wish that there were people that had the power to change this that were willing to. I really do. And you know, I'm not trying to impugn the intentions of all of these various progressive politicians, but I certainly am willing to look at the results and acknowledge where something has succeeded or failed. This failed miserably, and the Build Back Better bill was like, it wasn't some bastion of progressivism. It was a mildly progressive bill in some respects. It was nothing close to the kinds of structural changes that we need. And And even that they couldn't get past with a Democratic administration and Democrats controlling both houses, and they still don't understand why, as evidence from Pramila's response there. Huge shout out to Levi in the super chat there. Thank you so much for dropping a super chat. Once again, remind you all, super chats and realprogressives.org/donate if you'd like to help us out. We really do appreciate that. So I want to read you, actually, speaking of realprogressives.org, this is an article from Artemis, who writes for us at Real Progressives. You can find her work and other fantastic pieces on realprogressives.org. And this is about the push for anti-trans legislation in various forms all across the country. And she really got into some of these details here. So Artemis is a trans journalist and activist based in Salt Lake City. So she's writing here about Utah and the actions that they're trying to take against the trans community. So really want to encourage everybody to educate themselves on these issues. It's something that I should highlight more often, and I'm going to make a point to highlight more often. Thanks to Artemis for bringing it to all of our attention. Utah lawmakers look to legalize youth trans abuse. HB 11 would incorporate a state-based commission to establish a baseline range of physical characteristics affected by puberty. It further defines those characteristics as the following, quote, "The physical characteristics described may include height, weight, body mass, bone density, flexibility, wingspan, hip-to-knee ratio, stride, oxygen saturation, or the extent of physical characteristics affected by puberty, giving consideration to the practicability of I butchered that word. Practicability of considering the physical characteristic when making an assessment of an individual student's eligibility. In other words, all student athletes, cis and trans, will be subjected to invasive, violating inspections of their bodies to determine if they are boy enough or girl enough to determine, as determined by a commission created of, by, and for reactionary, petite bourgeoisie politicians. HB 11 is essentially phrenology for gender. Phrenology, of course, being a standard practice of Nazi Germany during World War II. Quote, "Phrenology is a pseudoscience that uses measurements of the human skull to determine personality traits, talents, and mental ability." Going further, this legislation would also classify all communications between state-sanctioned gender inspectors and the children they're violating as protected state records under existing Utah law. Any communications between the Gender Inspection Commission and other organizations such as athletic associations are also similarly non-public. Any record of the commission, including any communication between an athletic association and the commission that relates to a specific student, shall be classified as a protected record under Title 63G, Chapter 2, Government Records Access and Management Act. The Title 63G Section 2 of Utah State Code has a lengthy list of records types for each of the classification classes defined by itself. A protected record under current Utah law includes trade and governmental secrets, intergovernmental communications and proposals, civil and criminal enforcement records, and many more. In other words, HB 11 makes it as hard for a member of the public, like a concerned parent or a decent sports association, decent meaning here one acting as an actual ally to kids, especially trans kids, to access communications regarding their own children as it would be to access classified government secrets or corporate trade secrets. Even worse, the following lines create a form of qualified immunity for those acting as gender police. Quote, "Members of the commission are immune from suit with respect to all acts done and actions taken in good faith in carrying out the purposes of this part. The commission has no authority in relation to eligibility questions other than participation in a designated interscholastic activity under this part." It is not enough for Utah legislators that this bill legally codifies the creation and maintenance of a modern gender-based science that echoes Nazi race science in form. They had to go further and recreate qualified immunity for their newfangled gender police. Worse, the records regarding what the gender police do to children in the state-sanctioned and state-mandated genital and body inspections, also known as sexual harassment and assault. That's what it really is, right? That's for all children into classified state secrets. Quote, "My queerness is not a vice, is not deliberate, and harms no one." Coupled with HB 127, HB 11 would effectively criminalize trans youth existing in the public sphere. HB 127 bans gender transition-related care for all children under the age of 18. To be clear, gender transition-related care for youth, regardless of what it's called and how it is sensationalized, is reversibly delaying natal puberty for a small number of years. There's no such thing as irreversible surgeries for trans youth in the sense that no medical professional is going to perform them under current international standards. Our identities matter. They help make us who we are and shape our outlook. Existing in them is a radical act, one that requires in many instances courage, hard work, and determination. I am a better person because of the experiences and insights that I've had because I'm transgender. I'm a more compassionate person than I was before I accepted that part of my identity. Sarah McBride said that. Utah is dead last in the nation for mental health care. We don't have the resources for people to lead mentally healthy lives. Kids often cope with a lack of mental health care through extracurricular activities like sports. These bills say to trans kids, no, you aren't valid. No, you can't have bodily autonomy and free yourself from the flesh cage you were born in through medical care. And most of all, no, you can't even play with your friends to try to take your minds off how horrible we are to you and how, above all, our society wants you extinct. These awful sentiments are being wielded against the very kids already at a far higher risk of suicide than their peers. We are not a social justice issue. We are humans desperately trying to simply exist. The world built by cis people who have generally held global power since global colonialism is structured to be as inhospitable to us as possible. Trans people have been a part of humanity's makeup since humanity existed. Yet the hostility and violence directed at us every second of every minute of every day makes our prevailing survival a radical revolutionary act. Quote, the first lesson a revolutionary must learn is that he is a doomed man. That's Huey Newton's quote. Where does that leave those of us who are queer, whether trans or not? We didn't choose for our lives, our joy to be revolutionary. We, however, fully deserve lives filled with joy, dignity, and liberation. This is true for trans kids, trans teens, and trans adults. What legislation like this does, regardless of the claimed intent, is increasingly force us back into the shadows. These bills are not the product of a reasoning, compassionate hand. They are the soft power move of reactionary, bigoted politicians who fear losing power and their brand of normalcy. Quote, the fact that we live at the bottom of a deep gravity well on the surface of a gas-covered planet going around a nuclear fireball 90 million miles away and think this to be normal is obviously some indication of how skewed our perspective tends to be. That's Douglas Adams. Appeals to tradition, to sameness, have long been used by reactionary elements to galvanize support. In more recent history, the constant debate by cis folks as to the validity and acceptability of our existence continually undermines the recognition of our humanity. We're seen as subhuman in the Western colonial world, and it's tiring at best, lethal at worst. The progression of bills like HB 11 and HB 127 in Utah, as well as the bills in the other 29 states ramming through transphobic legislation of some variety, is built on the foundation of these debates and other insidious normalization of the false idea that trans equals lesser. And I just want to quickly note, you guys, there are some states where there are like a dozen plus pieces of legislation that in one way or another amount to anti-trans legislation. This is a very prominent issue right now. When Tulsi Gabbard introduced legislation banning trans people from sports at a federal level, the debate was, as always, centered on cis misperceptions and feelings like shock and outrage at our existence rather than medical facts. For example, any biological advantages trans women have from natal testosterone-dominant puberty are quickly wiped out by our second puberty on feminizing estrogen-dominant hormones replacement therapy. Our muscles atrophy and our bone density changes, and our bones reorganize themselves in degrees based on age. But cis folks don't seem to care about medical realities. Instead, the cis collective belies bewilderment at our existence in an echo chamber of their own creation, designed to punch down at trans people until the mere concept of us is erased. Today's transphobic state-level bills are a direct result of debate bros and federal representatives normalizing our supposed subhumanity. In rhetoric, one can see that the feminism appropriating radical transphobes are already moving on to talking about how we shouldn't be able to transition until 25 or later. And a common talking point of these same elements is how once we approach 30, we'll never see change from transition, so we shouldn't even try. Quote, when the majority of jokes made at the expense of trans people center on men wearing dresses or men who want their penises cut off, that is not transphobia, it is trans misogyny. When the majority of violence and sexual assaults emitted against trans people is directed at trans women, that is not transphobia, it is trans misogyny. That's Julia Serrano, or Serrano, excuse me. The cis male senator responsible for sponsoring and helping to draft HB 11 has been on the record making this bill about protecting cis females from trans females. He even went so far as to tell a constituent via email to provide him with a solution that protects young women athletes from this unfair competition while addressing the trans female athlete issue. Senator Kurt Bramble is literally pitting young women and girls against each other in a forced, violent, and cruel civil rights Olympics rather than the friendly and fun competitions after school that they signed up for with their friends. This is transphobia, yes, but more specifically, it is trans misogyny. These types of bills and arguments frequently boil down to trans misogyny. To these fascists, trans men are just confused women and trans women are malicious predators. It's the same dichotomy of patriarchy where women are helpless and men are ravagers, only repackaged to attack the most vulnerable people, those of us who are trans. And they showed the Kurt Bramble email that was referenced there. I could go on and on about statistics and about our historical existence. I could offer the slur the Vikings used for trans people and contextualize the mythology behind our distrust of gender fluid people. I could include quotes from indigenous people about their varied and diverse beliefs regarding gender. I could give up two-spirit people even. I could tell you about the Roman lord who offered a great sum to any physician who could give him a vagina. I would make the argument that Pope Joan was trans. I could make the argument that Pope Joan was trans. Trans people are being exterminated first, but we won't be the last. To answer Senator Bramble, the solution is to increase access to healthcare and break down cis-normative barriers to healthcare, education, employment, housing, and every other aspect of our society. The answer is a cultural shift to the point where trans people aren't subjugated to a never-ending debate as to our validity, rather respected and cherished as the beautiful humans we are. To resolve the trans issue, our society must let go of its violent colonial nature and embrace a new identity as an enlightened, liberating society. More importantly, however, we need cis folks to end their passivity. We need you to get loud, to contact politicians to pressure them into abandoning transphobic legislation. We need the cis collective to make it clear in every scenario where we come up that it is not okay to debate about whether we exist, and the only correct answer is that trans people deserve equal rights, equal opportunity, and equal access to outcomes as cis people. As of March 2nd, 2022, public pressure has stalled HB 127 for this legislative session, but HB 11 remains likely to pass. Trans kids have another year where Utah legislators won't rob them of health care and can breathe a minor sigh of relief. However, the victory isn't permanent, nor is it complete until, at a minimum, sweeping protections and equitable reforms are passed federally and the majority makes transphobia no longer socially acceptable. These attacks on our children aren't enough. These elements would only be partially satiated by the complete extermination and erasure of all trans people at all ages. If for some reason this isn't horrible enough for you to stand up and speak out, these kinds of elements, these reactionaries, these fascists, always move on to the next group that doesn't fit their ever narrower definition of purity. If you can't be bothered to stand up for trans kids and adults out of a sense of justice, compassion, and morality, it is time to try on and use your sense of self-defense. Absolutely fantastic article from Artemis. Again, I want to encourage everybody to go to realprogressives.org if you're interested in reading more pieces from Artemis and our other fantastic team of writers. I also I really want to encourage everybody to grasp the gravity of this. Okay, she mentioned there that there are 30 states where this legislation, where pieces of legislation are being proposed, and in some of those states, it is, like I said, a dozen or more pieces of legislation, numerous pieces of legislation. And this is not catching a whole lot of media attention, you guys. It's just not. And I include myself in that. I wish I covered this more, and I'm going to make a point to cover this more. But this is an issue that I want to make sure everybody's educating themselves on. Trans rights, trans lives matter, just like any other, minorities' lives matter. This is the response that I see from the cultural conservatives or what have you, to try to oppose this kind of messaging from Artemis is that they'll kind of do the all lives matter thing, right? So catch yourself there, you guys. Catch yourself when you're engaging in that kind of dynamic. Stand in solidarity with your trans comrades, and I want to thank Artemis for bringing this to our attention, and we'll keep up on those bills as they continue to hopefully be defeated, or if unfortunately pass. I know in Texas they had gotten a bill through or partially through or something like that. So there are areas where this is already taking effect. And again, we'll keep up on that story as it continues. Shout out to Donald for the super chat. Thank you so much. Once again, reminder, you guys, realprogressives.org/donate. If you want to help us out, super chats are also a way you can contribute to our organization. We really appreciate any help that you can provide. So the next story I have here is about how Biden is dragging a cancer patient through bankruptcy court in his ongoing efforts to oppose student borrowers. This is in the American Prospect. The Biden Education Department drags a bankrupt cancer patient into court. Despite vowing to change the way student loans are treated in bankruptcy, the administration is still using its discretion to limit payouts. This is by Alexander Salmon. 1 month before then presidential candidate Joe Biden secured the endorsement of his former rival Elizabeth Warren, he embraced her bankruptcy plan for student loan relief, which, by the way, is ironic for those that don't know the full background, because when Elizabeth Warren first came to political prominence in the United States, it was in the mid-2000s, and it was because she was opposing Joe Biden's attempts to make it harder for students to discharge their debt through bankruptcy court. Again, I got all the issues in the world with Elizabeth Warren, but she had this one right? So it's kind of ironic now that he turns around and takes her position of all positions. Quote, I've endorsed Elizabeth Warren's bankruptcy proposal, which allows for student debt to be relieved in bankruptcy and provides for a whole range of other issues, Biden said at the time. It marked an almost stunning reversal. The strictest provisions of the current bankruptcy law, which make it nearly impossible to discharge student loan debt, even while filing bankruptcy, were championed by Biden personally in 2005 when he was a senator. He sparred in a legislative hearing about the proposal at the time with Warren when she was still a Harvard law professor. Biden's shift on bankruptcy and student debt was perhaps the very strongest evidence that he was running to be a different politician as president than the profile he cut in the Senate. The bill created an especially onerous process for shedding student debt. After a debtor goes through the general filing process, they're required to submit a second action called an adversary proceeding, usually against the Education Department, which backs the vast majority of student loans in the United States. The person filing for bankruptcy must then prove undue hardship incurred by those debt payments to get the loans relieved. The Education Department then almost always opposes the filing, and the debtor is forced to prove it in court. This, in essence, is what candidate Biden pledged to change. And I just want to remind the audience, for those that may have missed this segment a couple weeks ago, I showed a clip of Julia Rock, who's a reporter for the Daily Poster, who kind of going into some of these details. Daily Poster's been all over covering the student debt stuff. And she pointed out one particular case that both Trump and Biden's administrations have participated in, where essentially what the Education Department argued was that because a student borrower had a 13-year-old child, that 13-year-old child would soon be able to work and help their parent pay off the bill. That's what the Education Department said under Trump, and then Biden doubled down on that position. That's the kind of narrative that they will push to try to keep people in crippling debt, and it is disgusting, right? Anyway, carrying on here. But over a year into the Biden administration, it has not changed. While the expectation remains that there will indeed be an overhaul, the Education Department still awaits guidance on its new protocol. In the meantime, it has continued apace with its discretionary practice of contesting undue hardship claims, forcing debtors to battle for student loan relief in court, and fighting them every step of the way. On March 8th, the department is scheduled to haul Heather Smart into court to contest her claim that she cannot pay the $95,000 she owes in student loans from her time attending New Mexico Junior College and East New Mexico University as part of her bankruptcy filing. Smart is filing for bankruptcy because of a debilitating cancer diagnosis. According to official documents, she is currently unemployed due to being in the process of receiving extensive medical care and treatment for myriad issues relating to several forms of aggressive and invasive cancer, as well as a blood disorder. She's expected to begin the first in a series of invasive surgeries just days after her court date opposite the Education Department, at which point she will be unable to maintain successful or meaningful employment for the foreseeable future and may potentially be permanently disabled as a result of treatment. Right now, she owes approximately $1,017 per month in federal student loan debt. Her unemployment sums to only $1,888 a month. The official position of the Education Department is that Smart's condition is not sufficiently hopeless. You got to be fucking kidding me. Quote, when her health improves, she has college degrees and is capable of maintaining full-time employment and can maintain an appropriate standard of living while repaying her loans, the department held in its response brief. To that end, she has been able to maintain good jobs in the past and can do so in the future. She has the burden of proof that she meets all three criteria of the Brunner test. Quote, overhauling the standard is relatively simple. Even without legislation, the Education Department could simply not contest the assertion of undue hardship. Okay. So the Education Department pretends that they have to contest these, and they don't. They don't. It's the same way that Biden pretends he doesn't have the power to cancel student loan debt via executive order. The education secretary can, of course, do this. And it's not a gray area, you guys. This has already been publicly litigated, so to say. And the consensus is, of course, he can cancel student loan debt if he so chooses. He has refused. Yet another promise that Joe Biden ran on that he has reneged on. And yet another one that he could do by himself without Congress, right? And in this case, it's particularly egregious. You have a cancer patient and you're basically saying, no, I want her to stay in crippling debt. So to all those out there who are like, I disagree with Biden, but he's a compassionate guy. He understands what suffering's like. And I mean, I'm sorry, read that story and tell me Biden's a compassionate guy. If you can with a straight face, I think you're a fucking liar. So Joe Biden demonstrating his inhumanity in a whole myriad of ways, and this is not the least of them. So we'll continue to keep up on this push. The Daily Poster's reporting did get the Education Department to budge a little bit in a couple particular cases, and take back their appeal. So I'm hoping that this issue gets enough noise that we can try to kind of force some hands on this. Again, as I often find myself saying when I say I hope such and such happens, I am not naive enough to expect it to. But I want to encourage everybody to keep the pressure up on this stuff, and try to force the hand of the Biden administration and the education secretary to follow through on the promises that he made on the campaign trail. For the record, he at different times said that he would cancel $50,000 in student loan debt and $10,000 in student loan debt. He's come absolutely nowhere close, you guys, nowhere close. So we'll keep up on that issue again as it continues to develop. This is another sort of foreign policy issue, and I loosely mentioned this during my Ukraine segment earlier to start the show off. But the fact that Biden has done nothing about millions of starving Afghans is, to me, very worthy of coverage. This is in The Intercept. Family members of 9/11 victims call on Biden to unfreeze Afghan funds. The families asked the White House to help end the mass starvation crisis in Afghanistan by releasing the country's U.S.-held foreign reserves. New guidance from the Treasury Department provides a pathway. This is by Daniel Boguslaw and Austin Allman. And just for the context, you guys, the reason that the 9/11 victims' families kind of matter here is because one of the excuses Biden has given for seizing those assets is that he is going to give it out to, the families of 9/11 victims. Now, there's a few things we could say about that. First of all, if you'd like to provide compensation to the victims of 9/11, you have the power of the purse. Do it yourself. Don't go starve Afghans so that you can do so. You can do it yourself. Right. So they're just hiding behind that. But that is why this is framed from the 9/11 victims' families' perspective. OK, and secondarily, though, The people of Afghanistan did not do 9/11, you guys. In fact, one of our closest allies, Saudi Arabia, was most involved with 9/11. But we've continued to support their genocide in Yemen. We've continued to arm them and fund them and consider them allies, right? And geopolitically align with them. So this pretending that this is about 9/11 thing is beyond outrageous. It's completely disconnected from reality, and it's a very disgusting thing to cynically and politically weaponize in this manner. To force millions into food insecurity and then hide behind this. It's just disgusting, you guys. Absolutely fucking disgusting. So anyway, I just wanted to make sure everybody understood the sort of the context here. We'll dive into the article. More than 20 years after September 11th, family members of those killed in the 2001 attacks have a message for the U.S. government. Release Afghanistan central bank assets before millions of civilians die of starvation. There is not only a moral imperative in doing this, there is also a national security interest in doing this and preventing Afghanistan from sliding into total collapse, said Terry Rockefeller, whose sister died at the World Trade Center on 9/11. Rockefeller is a member of September 11th Families for Peaceful Tomorrows, an organization formed by family members of those killed on 9/11 to oppose the war in Afghanistan. In February, the Biden administration announced that it would split over $7 billion in Afghan assets held in the New York Federal Reserve Bank between a pool of potential settlements for families of 9/11 victims and an ambiguously defined trust fund for the benefit of the Afghan people. The White House has yet to clarify when and how it will release the money, wary of the perceived legal and political repercussions and accompany transferring cash to the Afghan central bank, lest it be seen as giving money to the Taliban. White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki told reporters on February 15th that the administration was incapable of releasing any of the frozen funds. That's bullshit, by the way. Funds until pending litigation has ended, but legal experts have dismissed that claim. On Friday, the Treasury Department issued a new general license to allow economic transactions, with a suite of Afghan entities, including the country's central bank, the Afghanistan Bank, signaling a potential first step toward unfreezing the funds. The White House did not respond to a request from The Intercept to clarify whether it stood by Psaki's comments. The State Department reiterated the administration's intentions to divert $3.5 billion into a trust fund, but would not specify whether it believed that the administration had the power to immediately release those funds. So again, I want to draw the comparison, you guys. The sense of urgency that you feel about Ukraine right now and that the media presents about Ukraine right now. And again, I'm not trying to minimize, right? I sincerely, the people of Ukraine are in my thoughts, okay? Not trying to minimize at all. But the emphasis placed there, why is that emphasis not placed on this situation? Why is the administration allowed to just drag their fucking feet while Afghans starve to death? Why is that allowed? Why is that okay? Why is there no urgency there? Why isn't the press all over this? Why aren't we getting 1,300 stories in the major outlets about this? It goes to show you how the press operates and the dynamics that sort of drive press coverage, right? So, what do you even say? Shame on Joe Biden, as I often end my segments with. Shame on Joe Biden for this. You're causing Afghans to starve. And you're trying to hide behind like this virtue signal that you're doing it for the victims of 9/11. I mean, do you guys remember there was this Family Guy clip and Hillary ended up accidentally mimicking it, but Lois like ran for governor or something or mayor, I think it was. And she's being pressed about how she's allowing all this toxic dumping in the local lake, right? And all she kept saying was 9/11 was bad. And then the crowd would just like erupt into cheers, right? And they'd ask another specific question about the dumping or whatever, and she'd be like, 9/11 was bad, and they all just erupt in applause. Hillary Clinton ended up doing the same thing, where she said, in response to a question about her serving Wall Street instead of serving the people, she said, you know where I was on 9/11? I was there in New York, and that's where Wall Street is. And right? They literally just think they can answer anything by saying 9/11 was bad. And that's what the Biden administration is doing here. While they starve civilians, they're saying 9/11 was bad, so it's okay. What incoherent drivel. And yet the media runs with it and plays stenographer for the Biden administration. Most of the time, The Intercept, they're doing some good reporting. So again, outrageous justification from the Biden administration to allow Afghan civilians to fucking starve to death. And this should be getting a whole hell of a lot more coverage than it has. We'll keep up on that story as it continues to develop. At this point, guys, I want to do our weekly labor update. We're going to have a couple clips here from More Perfect Union and an article that I want to dive into. We're going to start with More Perfect Union talking about how UPS treated an injured worker. This is an absolutely outrageous story. Once again, encourage you all to follow More Perfect Union at More Perfect US on Twitter. They're also on YouTube. The channel is called More Perfect Union. They do fantastic reporting on labor organizing, and I encourage you all to follow their work. So this, again, More Perfect Union discussing UPS's treatment of an injured worker.
Told UPS treated injuries well. I was told that they took care of you and they wanted to get you back to work as fast as possible, and they wanted to get you the treatment as fast as possible. But in my experience, it was the complete opposite.
At the end of the day, if somebody gets hurt, they'll replace them. There's somebody else to take their spot the next day.
UPS, like FedEx, DHL, Amazon, right? They're warehouse, they're industrial environments. So they have an abnormal amount of injuries and accidents that happen. You know, they're very dangerous. Everything's a sharp object, everything is heavy. You're lifting, you're bumping into stuff, getting in and out of a truck 150, 200 times a day. I was hurt another time where a package, a 50-pound package, fell on my knee off a shelf in the truck, and I reported it immediately. I actually got fired for that. It was me and my business agent with about 10 or 11 people from the company in the room, everybody from labor, health and safety, security, and they just kept asking me how I got hurt. They said I lied under investigation, that I lied about what time I got hurt. I think I was off by 11 minutes.
The day I got hurt is October 4th, 2016. I was lifting a package, and in between the motion of lifting it from the floor, my disc herniated. It felt like I was being stabbed in my back, and right in my lower back, and it shot all the way down my leg, and I couldn't walk at all.
When I first got hurt, they wanted me to continue working. You could see the bump out from my elbow. I couldn't even straighten my elbow out, and I tried to continue working, but the pain was just overwhelming for me to keep going.
They asked me to go to Concentra in the morning. I didn't realize at the time that Concentra and UPS are in like cahoots, and that basically they're there to push us back to work. Take any MRIs, they didn't take any x-rays. They pushed me through to physical therapy. Physical therapy, I think, made it much worse. Concentra tried to make me go back to work. They tried telling UPS that I was fine, and then I refused it because of the pain that I was in. I went to the orthopedic. UPS and Liberty Mutual thought Dr. Brennan was crazy when he recommended the surgery.
They had a risk management person call me like every other month to find out if I had appointments scheduled, and I would tell them the dates, and then lo and behold, I'd have somebody following me to appointments. I don't know if it was UPS or private investigators or Liberty Mutual, they're the insurance carrier. I don't know who it was, but yeah, they were following me. They would park down the street from my house, constant.
I also won the workman's comp claim, and the judge admonished them, saying that I know what UPS does, tying injuries with discipline, and you're to stop that or I'm going to fine you, which he wound up doing.
We had to get it court ordered for me to get, for workman's comp, to pay for my physical therapy and to see the specialist in December. I'm just now getting my physical therapy in February.
The second to the third surgery, it took 4 or 5 months to get an MRI approved. The experience of having to go to court every time, it was gut-wrenching, honestly. It sucks. It really sucks. It hurts. Physically, mentally, emotionally, every single way possible. Because it's a circle.
Wishing and hoping that UPS will get better with helping their employees, especially employees that if we get hurt or injured, you will look after us a lot more better than what you have been doing.
As always, great coverage there from More Perfect Union. And I just wanted to add that this is one of the things that, I would prefer an NHS, but even Medicare for All would at least help to address. Because if you get hurt at work, you would not be relying on your employer to get you, treatment. So there would be less ability for firms to manipulate the treatment of their workers to avoid costs or to keep the workers, on the clock. So, just great coverage there on UPS's barbarity. It's hardly surprising to see this kind of stuff at this point, but I feel compelled to point it out. I think it's still very worthy of coverage, and I think we need to spark this labor movement even more than it already is at. And the way you do that is by telling people how horrendously barbaric a lot of these firms are. UPS certainly no exception. I want to read you guys a piece here. This is actually in Jacobin, and it's an example of labor organizing working from 80 years ago. So we're going to read this piece here. When musicians went on strike and won. This, again, like I said, 80 years ago. 80 years ago, thousands of musicians in the U.S. launched a 2-year strike against the recording industry. They won landmark gains, reminding musicians today that the best way to wrest back money from the streaming companies is to flex collective power. This year marks the 80th anniversary of the American Federation of Musicians' 1942 to 1944 strike against the recording industry. Demanding a bigger cut of the profits created by new recording technologies, the AFM's roughly 136,000 members refused to produce any recordings for 2 full years, and they won. Following the recording ban, as the strike is commonly known, the AMF secured contracts with over 600 record labels that required each company to cough up a royalty fee for every record sold. The royalty fund was then used to pay musicians across the United States and Canada to perform free public concerts. For decades, the union-controlled fund was the largest employer of musicians in the country. As musicians today contemplate how to demand more money from streaming services that paid just 1/3 of a cent per stream, the AFM's successful strike offers key lessons about how to win a better deal for labor. After all, this radical change did not emerge from the actions of a few isolated celebrities, nor a disorganized consumer boycott, nor a tech utopian cure-all, but rather the flexing of strike power by an organized mass of music workers. The American Federation of Musicians was founded in 1896 by a coalition of local musician unions that split with an earlier, more conservative federation called the National League of Musicians. In its first decades, the AFM rapidly expanded, coming to dominate the entertainment industries across the United States and Canada. Unlike the NLM, the AFM extended membership to any musician who receives pay for his musical services. The organized musicians at thousands of small theaters, cabarets, orchestras, and other employers in dozens of cities. Their efforts were so successful that within 2 decades, the union ran a closed shop in most major cities. If you wanted to perform, you had to be in the union. The result was a gradual but substantial increase in wages for musicians from the AFM's founding until the Great Depression. AFM membership nearly doubled between 1918 and 1928 to some 150,000 musicians. In the late 1920s, however, the combination of new technologies and increasingly concentrated music industry undercut of unincreasingly concentrated music industry undercut the AFM's progress. First came the Vitaphone, an audio system that allowed pre-recorded sound to be synced with motion pictures, displacing the tens of thousands of live musicians that had accompanied silent films. Not long after, radio stations began to broadcast recorded music via special records called transcriptions, displacing the musicians who played live music for broadcasts. Jukeboxes and the mass production of record players and vinyl records for the consumer market in the 1940s further removed the need for live musicians. While more and more musicians faced unemployment, the broadcast and recording companies were seeing unprecedented profits by the late 1930s. Three companies, Decca, Columbia, and RCA Victor, dominated the production of records. A few networks, NBC, CBS, and Mutual, controlled most of the airwaves. Monopolistic companies like RCA came to own a network, a host of radio stations, a record label, and a transcription label. The industry set up a trade group, the National Association of Broadcasters, which became the primary adversary of the AFM. For musicians, it was clear the industry was making boatloads of money with the new technologies. The question was how to wrest back a bigger share of the profits. From boycott to strike, the AFM's first strategy was a consumer-focused PR campaign. Under the leadership of its president, Joseph Webster, the union launched a national effort to convince consumers that live music was aesthetically and morally superior to recorded music. The union sent mailers, took ads out in newspapers, and held parades and marches to gin up public support for live musicians. But despite garnering some approval from audiences, the campaign floundered. The AFM severely misjudged music consumers, many of whom regarded the AFM as foolishly anti-technology and anti-progress. And by depending on audiences for leverage, the union failed to build power among its own members. Musician unemployment continued to soar, and the AFM steadily hemorrhaged members and money through the mid-1930s. Calls for more radical worker-based action grew louder. The AFM began to answer that call in 1937 when Weber finally jettisoned his accommodationist policies and told, I'm sorry guys, I've been reading so much today, I'm starting to just like, whoa. And told radio affiliates that his union would strike if they refused to employ a certain number of live musicians. The militant strategy picked up steam in 1940 when James Petrillo, the leader of Chicago Local 10, took over as AFM president. As the head of Chicago, Petrillo had frequently used strikes to win concessions from the city's radio stations. Petrillo brought that muscular approach to the national level, and by 1940, the AFM led a set of brief but victorious walkouts against radio stations that were refusing to maintain staff orchestras. The AFM started to expand again, with membership mushrooming from 105,000 to 136,000 between 1936 and 1942. But forcing radio to retain live musicians could only show the march of technological displacement for so long. Soon, the AFM decided to take on the root problem: corporate control over the creation and broadcast of recorded music. In June of 1942, the union announced that its tens of thousands of members would refuse to produce any new recordings in the United States or Canada. Initially, the union did not present a clear demand to the music industry. Instead, the AFM simply declared that music workers were striking because they deserved greater compensation from an industry that was raking in massive profits from their work. The strike infuriated both recording companies and broadcasters, who launched an aggressive PR campaign against Petrillo and the AFM, branding them as unpatriotic Luddites? Jesus Christ. It was an unfair change. The union sought out not to destroy recording technology, but rather to gain a bigger piece of the surplus created by the new technologies. But the strike proved contentious, especially because it erupted during World War II, when the AFL and CIO had both signed no strike pledges with the U.S. government. The union did carve out an exception for V-discs, records destined for soldiers or to promote the war effort. And they carry on here, you guys, but you kind of get the point, right? I wanted to get you guys the background and how it all kind of built up to this point where such a strike had to happen. Obviously, the music industry is still incredibly exploitative. In fact, we covered a story maybe a month or so ago about how Spotify basically pays almost nothing to the people who are actually providing them with content. So this is an ongoing problem, but in the 40s, they did receive some serious concessions by simply saying, no, we're fucking done. You know, we're not doing shit for you. You're going to have to pay us more. And it lasted 2 years, you guys, because the capitalists will always try to wait you out and make you desperate enough to give up. So good on all these musicians and this union for holding strong. And this is an example of how labor organizing is so effective, using the collective, using the power of the collective, and wielding that power instead of allowing yourself to be convinced by the managerial and wealthy classes that in the ownership class that you don't have that power. They want you to feel completely helpless and powerless. You have that power. And as soon as you start to wield it, you start seeing the union busting and you start seeing the PR campaigns and all this stuff. That's an indication that they're scared. They wouldn't be scared if you didn't have the power. So this is just a particular example of how collective power can be effective at bringing about progressive change. And we have one more perfect union video here, you guys. This is a leaked video of a pro-union Starbucks employee being reprimanded and punished for her union activities. Starbucks, again, blatantly violating the law. And the NLRB has been so effectively defanged that they can do very little about it. So this is more perfect union, again, covering Starbucks, a leaked video of an employee being reprimanded for her. They say it was something else, but it's for her union activities. It's very clear.
I don't deserve a write-up. I don't deserve anything of my record.
This is a written warning.
I close this store all the time. I do my best. I do clean play. I ask for clean play. I do everything. And I get this improper call out. I'm in the hospital. A call out a different time because my aunt died. The guys are like after to get me because I'm the only one that speaks up to them. And it's not fair. It's not. This is not right for a 3-year partner that puts in everything to the store. I love this Starbucks. There's no way I deserve any of that.
This is happening.
I think I want to put in my 2 weeks.
Okay, you can do that. If that's your decision, I can give you a piece of paper
and
you can write that down.
This way.
Is that the decision you want to make?
I just want to call my mom right now.
Will you grab a piece of paper?
Can I please call my mom?
I've been working for 40 years. I've been working since I was 15 years old. I watched that 16 minutes of video, however long it is. I have never been a part of anything like that.
And it made me really, not even just fearful, but angry to see someone that works so hard be treated that poorly.
She will work overtime. She will work when she's not even getting paid to work. She will work doubles. She won't even take lunches. I was so surprised that Layla was being targeted because of such minor infractions.
I demanded that a shift was covered. No, I did not demand. I asked you, I said, can you please? So the word using demanded, you know how bad that makes me feel? I would never demand anything from
that word out. We can
no, but it's just the words you do that. I deserve more respect.
A lot of them were just made up, and I did feel scared. I felt like maybe I would be targeted next because I was a part of the union.
Even before we went public, when the management got wind of it, that's when a lot of the nitpicking started, and that's when, you know, that whole incident happened. Layla had stood up to management in the past over being treated unfairly and not really having a voice in the store and in the company, and so once they got wind of the unionizing, I feel like they definitely chose to target her.
Over about a 3-week period, this is in early January, things again started really deteriorating with the staff shortages, scheduling, things like this.
Some of these baristas, I like them, but they weren't trained and they know that and they try their best. Being a former barista, having no training, being thrown on the floor the first day, being yelled at, having coworkers not support me, not understand that I'm trying my best, I couldn't let anyone else ever go through that. And I need everyone to know that I'm there for them. And if that means I can't take my lunch, then I won't take it. Once I saw things starting to go downhill, once we got a new manager, I immediately spoke up.
She had tried several things with management to address the issue, and nothing was getting resolved. I brought it up to Layla. I said, you know, there's a way to make some big change, but it's going to take a big commitment. And so I talked to her about the union.
That just gave me so much hope, and I was like, yes, I'm 100%, I could do this. I am 100% willing to give everything to this.
I got a phone call, and asking if I wanted to be a part of the union. So I signed some cards, and that's when it all started.
We called people, I drove to people's houses. I did anything possible just to get this going. We knew that once Starbucks found out about us, they got a little wisp of like, we're about to start a union, they're gonna try and shut us down.
The first bullet point, right? Layla has failed to fully meet performance expectations of the shift supervisor position, specifically time and attendance policy on page 27. So I want to review that with you so that we can make sure that when we walk away today,
I'm always here on time.
that there's no questions about the time and attendance policy. Okay?
I'm never late. I think I want to put in my 2 weeks.
Okay, you can do that.
They know that she's a very strong person within the union and within the group. And they also know that she knows her worth, and she knows when enough is enough, and if she's getting picked on, she's not going to deal with it, and they tried to use that against her by trying to make her quit.
Everyone who has just been a part of the union, especially the Buffalo partners and the Arizona partners in Mesa, they've all been so supportive. Starbucks corporate might think they're untouchable, but when you have a bunch of people all over the whole country who are supporting others and love their company and want to do the best just to have better working conditions, it makes me feel like, okay, like we do have a chance, like we are gonna make change, because it's not just me, like we all are putting in our all.
I love how she put that at the end. Starbucks corporate may think they're untouchable, but they're not. And that's being proven right now with well over 100 filings and a number of successes. To treat someone you call a partner like that, what do I even fucking say? And to pretend that it's not about her union activities when you discipline her the very next shift after she's been handing out union material. They're so fucking brazen. And that's an indication of how sure they are that they're going to get away with it. It's the same kind of stuff that Amazon did. It's all these corporations. This is what they do when they're challenged, when their attempts to consolidate as much of the profit as possible for their shareholders and executives are challenged. So the very people who are making them those profits are treated like fucking garbage. And that's a shame. And for Starbucks to pretend, and I know I say this every fucking week, but for Starbucks to pretend that they're some sort of progressive, forward-thinking company, for them to call their workers partners and then treat them like this makes it all the more nauseating, because the hypocrisy just adds a layer of disgust to all of this, right? So I do want to sort of spin this positively, though, in the sense that obviously they would not be responding like this if they were not threatened and terrified, and that's because this movement is working. So if you are in an area where Starbucks is where the workers are attempting to unionize a Starbucks, do whatever you can to support those workers, you guys. I mean, I advocate going into the store and saying, until this is a union store, I'm not shopping here. You're done. I encourage, if you're a regular customer of Starbucks, make sure that the people at the store that you frequent know that they can unionize, and that there's been some success across the country. I just do your part to combat the narratives from Starbucks. Do your part to support workers, not just at Starbucks, in any capacity. Do your part to support striking workers, unionizing workers, protesting workers, workers walking out, etc. This is a catalyst for progressive movements, you guys. This is something that could be a backbone for the kinds of changes that we want to see. This is where you can attack them. You guys, I won't even get 1,000 views on this fucking live stream. The independent media cannot attack them. But if you actually effectively attack them, I should say. But if you actually take a shot at their profits, if you can hit their wallets, if you can hit the dividends for shareholders, and if you can hit the bonuses for executives, then you see how they respond, right? Viscerally, in opposition to the very people who are earning them the profits that the company makes. So I stand in full solidarity with the Starbucks workers. I stand in full solidarity with the UPS workers and the musicians and any other group of working people who are fighting against this system that is so grossly inhumane and inequitable in how it distributes wealth. So, once again, at More Perfect US, you guys go follow More Perfect Union. They are consistently doing fantastic reporting on the labor movement. And this is one of the few areas in politics where I find some sincere hope and inspiration. And I hope that you all will get involved in whatever capacity you possibly can. We have a thread here from another regular contributor to the show, although I would love to have him on sometime to talk about this stuff. But Alec Karakatsanis is an attorney who talks a lot about how the media engages in propaganda. At Equality Alec, if you're not following him, I'm going to read you a thread he posted earlier today. Thread. Today, the New York Times published what might be its worst police propaganda article yet. It's by the same newly hired reporter who I've written about before. I try my best below to explain what happened and why it is so important. Today's article is by the same reporter who published similar false and misleading factual claims with similar sources and similarly excluded the evidence and research that contradicts him. Here was my prior critique, and he links to his recent thread about this reporter. The thesis of today's article is that it is a false choice to invest in either police or alternatives to police. We should do more of both because the article says, quote, policing in general reduces crime and violence. That is patently false. Patently false. If you go to areas with the most police, you're going to be in areas that have the most violent crime. If you go to areas that have less police but better social services, you're going to be in an area with less violent crime. But they just assert that, they don't cite it, and they assume that everyone will just digest that as a fact, as though it is a consensus among experts. This is one of the ways the New York Times does this propaganda, is they act as though there's a consensus among criminologists and attorneys about this stuff. And it's just patently false, that it's the New York Times publishing lies and refusing to cite those lies. Note that the reporter has very weak evidence. He omits research showing modern policing does not reduce crime, and the few pro-cop studies he cherry picks are flawed for reasons I've explained, like they omit crimes committed by cops when counting crime, right? Police can murder people, and that doesn't count towards the murder rate, right? You see how this works? Nonetheless, policing, we are told, reduces immediate violence, and other alternatives reduce long-term violence. The basis for the article's thesis, therefore, is that, quote, both sides work best together, experts said. Notice that they say experts said, without citing the experts, right? Without none of it. This sentence belongs in the Journalism Hall of Fame. First, the reporter employs a common unethical tactic. He uses the vague term experts to make it seem like there is consensus among knowledgeable people. Readers are told that experts on the issue agree. There is no hint that this claim is hugely controversial among experts. This attempt to hide from readers an important and interesting debate is a failure of journalism on a life and death issue. It is vital to ask questions about whether and how much harm and violence in our society is linked to inequality or to minor tweaks to policing tactics. Second, note how bizarre this claim is on its face. Later in the article, reporter drops a quiet bombshell. Even the flawed pro-cop research he cites shows that policing has very limited short-term effects on small areas, but this positive effects evaporate over time. Let this sink in because he buried the lead. Although U.S. has embarked on globally unprecedented spending on police and prisons for 50 years, they don't reduce crime long-term. If spending on cops made us safe, U.S. would be safest society in history. So this reporter is arguing that we should trap ourselves in yet another cycle of foolish short-term band-aids that not only bring enormous costs, human by caging millions and separating millions of children and financial by costing trillions. And by the way, he means local constituencies, right? Police are funded locally largely, but that don't even work long-term. Worse, there is a virtual consensus of historians, sociologists, anthropologists, economists, etc., who have studied the issue. The violence, political lobbying, trauma, public relations, profitability, and surveillance of police are a driver of inequality. Therefore, for those who actually study the issue, it makes little sense to advocate increasing money and power for cops while also gesturing at reducing inequality and investing in affordable housing, etc. Many experts have shown police actually block those things. In fact, to take just two highly researched examples, one, controlling the poor to benefit real estate developers, and two, the surveillance and brutal infiltration of social movements, are two consistent and defining features of the last 125 years of policing. To see how this works, when more and more is invested in police and the for-profit corporations who drive a lot of the police bureaucracy's waste, fraud, and abuse, read this amazing report about what happened in Los Angeles. The incredible history of U.S. police, from union-busting corporate squads and slave patrols to modern law enforcement, marketed as protecting public safety, is available in the book Our Enemies in Blue, which you can read free, and he cites the link there. Finally, I want to note that this reporter's work has gotten more sophisticated. Instead of making outlandish claims about police in isolation, he is now combing those claims with gestures about needing to invest in alternatives as well. This is a tried and true strategy. As I've written about those who benefit from ever metastasizing punishment bureaucracy that elites use to preserve inequality, create nice-sounding reform rhetoric to get well-meaning liberals to oppose needed structural changes. It's a repeat cycle. And he always ends, or often ends his threads with a cute picture of his cat. He says, while I was writing this thread, he climbed into the fireplace and now he has soot all over his face. And he adds here, update, want to make clear that one thing that makes this let's spend more on cops and fix inequality 2 line so disingenuous is they know investing in cops is the only thing meaningfully on the table, and that massive investment in housing, schools, health, arts, etc. isn't. Again, excellent reporting there on the nature of propaganda from Alec Karakatsanis. He also had a fantastic thread the other day responding to Joe Biden's call for more funding for police and how dangerous that kind of propaganda is. So the New York Times, a very regular perpetrator of this kind of propaganda, despite being considered the gold standard of journalism, they're overtly lying to you and then covering themselves by saying, well, experts say. That's something to look out for too, you guys. Like this is a common tactic used by those like on cable news, for example, where they'll say when they want to present their own opinion, they'll say, well, you know, people say, and then they'll just give their opinion with no sort of like explanation of how many people say or how many people disagree. And by doing that, you create this sort of like assumption among your viewers that that's a consensus. It's one of the most simple and yet most nefarious forms of propaganda out there. You omit the opposition and then prop up your position as though it's an expert consensus. Alec is always tearing these shitty journalists to shreds, and I would encourage you all to follow him at Equality Alec. And we have a story here in The Intercept that I wanted to get to about what is likely a wrongful execution set to happen in April. Rush to judge. This again, The Intercept. Rush to judgment. Is Texas sending Melissa Lucio to die for a crime that never happened? By Liliana Segura and Jordan Smith. Dr. Thomas Young is adamant Melissa Lucio should not be put to death. Quote, this would be a horrible, horrible tragedy if she ends up getting executed over this, he said. It's just not right. Young is a veteran forensic pathologist and the former chief medical examiner in Kansas City, Missouri. For years, he has sounded the alarm about forensic science practices that lead to wrongful convictions with a focus on faulty inferences in death investigations. He said that's exactly what happened in Lucio's case. Lucio has been in Texas on Texas's death row since 2008 for killing her 2-year-old daughter, Mariah. According to the state, Lucio repeatedly abused the toddler until she finally succumbed to her injuries. The problem, says Young, who first reviewed the case at the behest of Lucio's post-conviction attorney, is that the medical examiner who conducted Mariah's autopsy and then offered unequivocal trial testimony that blamed Lucio for her daughter's death got it wrong. That pathologist, Young said, appears to have jumped to conclusions while ignoring evidence that pointed towards Mariah's death being the result of an accident. Quote, you develop a belief and come hell or high water, you're going to defend your belief, Young said. This happens all too often in forensic pathology and forensic science in general. The state's case against Lucio was weak but ultimately devastating. Instead of conducting an investigation into what happened to Mariah, police in the Rio Grande Valley city of Harlington hauled Lucio in for a marathon interrogation the night her child died and aggressively pushed her to confess. Jurors at her trial were shown a video of the more than 5-hour confrontation and heard from cops who insisted that Lucio wasn't behaving like a grieving mother. They were also shown numerous photos of Mariah's body, which was horribly bruised. The pathologist, Dr. Norma Jean Farley, said there was no doubt that Mariah was a battered child. Meanwhile, the defense failed to call witnesses who could have questioned the state's assumptions about Mariah's death or offered an alternative explanation for her injuries. Farley did not respond to the Intercept's request for comment, nor did Peter Gilman, Lucio's lead attorney at trial. The case came at a pivotal time for embattled Cameron County District Attorney Armando Villalobos, who used Lucio's trial to boost his tough-on-crime reputation as part of his re-election campaign. The DA, who would go on to win that November, would be known as the man who sent the first Latina woman to Texas's death row. Lucio's case is an example of the kind of rush to judgment that often follows the untimely death of a child. A parent or caretaker perceived to be unfit can easily turn into a criminal suspect. Authorities are especially quick to judge poor people of color, especially women who are stereotyped as bad mothers. If Mariah died as the result of an accident, as Young believes, that means Lucio, who has always maintained her innocence, is sitting on death row for a crime that never happened. Since 1989, at least 70 women have been exonerated for murders they did not commit, according to the National Registry of Exonerations. In 31 cases, no crime was ever committed. Nearly half of those involved child victims. Lucio's case also reflects how Texas courts routinely ignore evidence of innocence in order to carry out the death penalty. After Lucio's conviction was overturned by a 3-judge panel of the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals, which found that the trial court violated her right to present a complete defense by barring the testimony of 2 witnesses, prosecutors successfully appealed, convincing the same court to reinstate Lucio's conviction in 2021. In January, the state set an execution date of April 27th. With Lucio's execution date approaching, anti-death penalty organizers have joined her family in the Rio Grande Valley in a campaign to save her life. Activists have held public screenings of a 2020 documentary film about Lucio, quote, The State of Texas versus Melissa, which revealed crucial evidence that was never used at trial. Meanwhile, the Innocence Project is calling on the Cameron County District Attorney to withdraw Lucio's execution date and conduct a review of her case. If the efforts are unsuccessful, Lucio will become the 7th woman executed in Texas and the first in nearly a decade. Quote, I've been doing capital defense work in Texas for 30 years now, said Sandra Babcock, a Cornell Law School professor and founder of the Cornell Center on the Death Penalty Worldwide, and this is by far the weakest capital case I have ever seen. Obviously, this is a huge deal, you guys, in a number of respects. First of all, the death penalty is grossly inhumane and barbaric, and a condemnation on our society that we continue to engage in that. I like I think it was Kyle Kalinske that had this analysis where analogy where he said the death penalty should be put to death because the second that the death penalty kills an innocent person, which it does all the time, now it's guilty of murder, isn't it? Like, by its own logic, doesn't it now need to be put to death? I really kind of like that way of presenting it. The other element here, though, you guys, is how prosecutors and police behave and how they are motivated as public officials to come to a conviction, whether or not that conviction was right, because then the public will view the DA as keeping them safe. And this ties nicely in. I put these 2 stories together for a reason. This ties nicely into the stuff that Alec talks about, the propaganda that is used to fearmonger about crime, disingenuously or outright deceitfully fearmonger about crime, and results in things like wrongful convictions like Lucio's. So if you happen to be in Texas, I encourage you to get involved with the Innocence Project and other organizations there that are attempting to save her life, and more broadly, oppose the death penalty, you guys, and resist the kinds of propaganda that lead people to fear their own fellow human beings instead of fearing the systems that prop up police and prosecutors and courts and jails and prisons and death rows and all this, okay? So with that, you guys, I will call it a show. I once again, I want to apologize. I kind of was, it's a hectic time in my life right now, you guys, and I've hardly slept. So if I was a little bit all over the place, I know I kept stumbling all over as I was reading articles and things. I do want to apologize. Hopefully things will have calmed down a little bit next week. Huge thanks to both Eric and Sabrina for joining the show today. Please do remember to get involved with Eric and his adventures there in DC. If you happen to be on the East Coast or in the DC area, or if you know anyone who might want to get involved with Eric, please have them contact him at Vest Actions on Twitter. If you're not following Eric at Vest Actions, go follow him. And if you're not following Revolutionary Blackout Network, Sabby and her show, make sure to go follow them as well at Sabby Sabs 2 and at Rev Black Network. They also are both on YouTube under the same names. So thanks to everybody for helping make today's show as good as it possibly could be, considering my state. And I also want to plug again Real Progressives, you guys. Artemis's fantastic article and others can be found at realprogressives.org. If you'd like to help us out, realprogressives.org/donate. You can also leave a super chat on one of my streams, as a number of generous people did today. Don't miss our articles. Don't miss our podcast, the Macro and Cheese podcast with our founder and CEO, Steve Grumbine, his new show, The Rogue Scholar, during the week. Don't miss Jody Newell's show, The Up and Up, with activists, that drops on Thursdays. And as usual, you guys can tune in here Sunday at 2 Pacific, 5 Eastern for my usual stream. I hope you all have an absolutely fantastic week, and I will see you again next week.